All right. Well, I believe we are now going.
Okay.
Yeah, all right.
This is good.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry in
hello.
advance. No, wait. I have to apologize. It's the only time this is ever going to happen. I want to apologize for my mic quality. I'm in undisclosed location, and I promise you, I'm getting a travel mic and travel XLR mixer. So this is the last time, God willing. Yes, Alice. my sweet.
Why is your location turned to Mount Weather, Virginia?
Oh, so here's the thing: is that's wrong. Actually, I'm in the Raven
Okay.
Mountain complex. Yeah, we're at the local CIA, FBI, DEA wellness retreat, and right after this, we're gonna go enhanced interrogate our clown merchant who ripped us off. If you know what I mean.
Because of the reciprocity agreements, after they turned the Greenbrier into a bunker, they had to turn one of the bunkers into a luxury hotel and spa, and they did that at Raven Rock. So
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Well,
Yeah.
according to Liam's mic quality, Raven Rock is now a gamer dungeon.
I'm in Western Pennsylvania, is where I am.
Site R for relaxation.
Yes, here's the thing, right? Is that when I mercilessly beat a 12-year-old child to death, I do it properly.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was tennis.
welcome-
I'm changing it to my second input so I can watch the slides on my television. The future is now.
This is true.
Welcome to Well, There's Your Problem. It's
Shut
a
up.
podcast about engineering disasters with slides. I'm Justin Rosniak. I'm the person who's talking right now. My pronouns are he and him. Okay, go.
I am Alice Caldwell Kelly. I'm the person who's talking now. My pronouns are she and her. Yay, Liam.
Yay, Liam. Hi, I'm Liam Anderson. I'm your least favorite host, but suck my fucking dick. Guy who left a review on this podcast on podchaser.com just to get mad at me.
Sorry, Podchaser.
I think it's
Podchaser.
called Podchaser. Yeah, it has nothing to do with trans people, shockingly enough.
It's only for podcasts with trans people on.
Star
That's right,
Wars
yeah,
1
yeah,
reference.
This is what I call pod chasing.
But yeah, to you specifically, I say, how does my dick taste? And I can hear myself, so I'm going to turn me down a little bit.
What does this say? Batteries bottom text. This is a disgusting
We
betrayal of Italy month.
We have a
We're
guest
done Italy
as well.
month. Actually,
What?
Tom from 10,000 Losses, big shouts Tom Payne, was just like, please tell me Italy month was over, and I was like, I think it is, Tom. It was horrible. We should just turn into an Italian disasters podcast.
We also have a guest today.
No, we don't.
Yeah, we
Hello,
do.
that would be me.
Shut
I
up.
talk about trains, cities, and other garbage on the internet. My name is Alan. He, him, dude, whatever. So,
Nice.
Is
Hello.
it he, him, or
Right.
Eddie? That was very, that
or
was
dude.
confusing.
he, him, but also just dude.
Is dude
The pronoun is dude. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, is dude a pronoun? Because
Yeah,
it
it's
is
a neo
the way
pronoun.
It's a neo
guess it
pronoun,
is a-
bro.
that'll do it.
Yeah.
But today we have a slide that says batteries.
Bottom text.
We're going to be a little bit more.
Invented in Italy. Great Italian
Yes.
invention. I'm going to
Yep.
force this into the paradigm of Italy month. This is like the legacy of Galvani and Volta here.
I mean, it's September. August was Italy month. We're recording this in September.
Italian month is in your heart, Alice, I think.
Yes, that's
also,
true.
congratulations to my dad for not dying in August.
Oh, congratulations,
Oh, yeah.
Liam's dad.
That's always a good thing.
Today we're specifically going to talk about the concept of battery electric locomotives.
They don't
why they're
work and
kind
they're
of,
bad. And shut up.
A silly idea.
We finally
you know,
got
and-
another trains episode.
They're
Been a minute.
gadget bonds,
Yeah.
Alan. You know this.
Yeah, we got another train episode, you sick fucks. We know
Exactly.
you want it.
and we're gonna try and avoid some of the well-trodden territory around batteries, like let's say resource extraction or something like that. This is going to talk a lot about railroad operations and why battery locomotives are likely to have a hard time competing with diesel locomotives for a while, and likely will never outperform traditional electric locomotives.
Why
And
they're a
sort
bad
of-
thing on the demand end rather than the supply end, if you will.
Yes. and some of the ramifications of that. But first, we have to do the goddamn news.
Oh, it's not going to be a fun news segment this episode.
No, this is not a good one.
This is your future, everybody.
Oh, it's your present. So if
Well,
you're familiar with
Mississippi, yeah,
the
I guess I said everybody.
yeah, the city of Jackson, Mississippi, it's the state capital. It's home to 150,000 people. Got a water network that services about 250,000 people, and that water network doesn't work, and it's about to hit 90 degrees.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy that you just let a water system go offline like this.
Well, this is the sort of the proximate cause of this is, ironically enough, flooding. The Pearl River flooded, and that destroyed all of the pumps at the city's one water plant.
Yeah.
Theoretically, this puts 250,000 people under a sort of a boil water advisory, but the water
There's
pressure
no
is so
water
low
to be
that-
had. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. The water is there, but it can't get through the pipes, so you can't. We certainly can't drink it, but you can't shower, you can't flush your toilet, you can't fight fires with it.
Don't forget though that the governor, was it Tate Reeves or Reeves Tate, is getting water delivered to the executive mansion. In a big
he literally
tankers.
has a big tanker truck parked outside the state house.
And this is why, like, it's frustrating when, I'm sure we've all seen it, is when some gigabrain liberal will be on Twitter or whatever, and they'll say like, "Oh, why should we care about the people in the red states?" And it's like, well, these are the people you should be caring about that get fucked over.
Is it Mississippi the blackest state, or is it Alabama?
It is, and
one of
Jackson,
the two, yeah.
Jackson is both blacker and poorer than Mississippi on average. It's a classic example of white flight in the 60s and 70s.
Exactly.
Decimating the tax base and the state ripping all of the services out of the city, leaving all of the resulting poverty and suffering to black people, and then now getting the feds to clean it all up after them. So you've got the National Guard deployed, that there's not that much they can do other than delivering pallets of bottled water. The federal government's on the hook for like 75% of the funding to fix all of this shit.
It's frustrating because it's like tons of cities in the South are like this, where you've seen just money just drained out of the cities into the wealthy white suburbs, where it's just like where you see like tax policies and different things where they once in a while are like, whoopsie, didn't mean to do that, when it's like obvious, like, yeah, that was the whole plan the entire time. So.
I think Mississippi's like uniquely bad in that respect, because even in like Alabama, they have the big Alabama pension fund there has been making major investments into city centers. I mean, places like Birmingham and Mobile are very much on the upswing. Jackson is not. It's not seen any form of it's still very much in decline. They don't even have gentrification there. They haven't invented it yet.
No, I also want to point out that we knew about these issues back in 2015, and it was supposed to cost anywhere from $750 to about $1 billion, and just didn't get fixed. And Alan, I did want to say to your point, I mean, if you're a listener to this podcast, hopefully you sort of know better than that. Obviously, these poor black people are getting fucked by the state and getting fucked by the government on purpose. And for you to say, well, who gives a shit? It's like, poor black people are disproportionately suffering, and they don't need you to fucking do white savior shit to them.
Yeah, and it's just frustrating because it's like, mainly the listeners of this podcast and most of the people here would know better, but it's the people we see on Twitter. That's just Twitter.
Yeah, and as you said, this was a known issue. It basically happened in miniature last year, February of last year. The water went out for weeks, like 225 days. They had a boil water advisory.
It was a state of emergency 7 years ago. I want to make that known.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing you can do is there's a group of sort of local, like a group of groups, the Mississippi Rapid Response Coalition. They want like $2 million in donations. There's going to be a link in the description. Unfortunately, it will be an Act Blue link, so you will get a bunch of texts from Pete Buttigieg.
You'll also, for some reason, get an email from Joe Biden's campaign where the subject line is "all gas, no brakes," which at least which gave me a laugh when I saw it, because I donate to NARAL, who uses Act Blue, And the Biden campaign, therefore, of course, got my my email address. But I did get a chuckle out of Biden saying all gas, no brakes. I was like, all right, as someone who's incredibly like riding a bike downhill with no brakes constantly, that's also on fire. I dig this.
Yeah, he's a literal accelerationist there. But yeah. So you will get a bunch of emails from like Liz Warren at 3 a.m. going like, "Your name, I need you." But
It
yeah,
won't be. It won't be what you think it is.
You will have a big structural Bailey delivered to your house.
Yes, but do it anyway. Simply, you must suffer. This is your duty.
In other very different news, too much water in Pakistan.
A modest
The
proposal.
way you said that really made me laugh.
A modest proposal presents itself here. So this is like an order of magnitude worse than the already horrible thing that we talked about up front.
2 orders of magnitude, actually.
Oh, the thing is, I don't actually know how much an order of magnitude is. I just use it
It's
to mean
a
a lot.
multiple of 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're young enough, you're probably going to get to remember this as being one of, if not the first big climate change disasters of your lifetime. And there are going to be many more to come. Essentially, what happened is that Pakistan had a way too big monsoon season.
Yes.
You may recall in May of this year, temperatures across the subcontinent, but including in Pakistan, hit sort of ridiculous numbers, 120s or so. This was bad at the time. It killed some people at the time, but it has downstream effects like melting a shitload of glaciers and making the soil much less absorbent and making the air much more moist. And all of these things continued to sort of broil away. And then Pakistan gets hit with a massive low pressure system from the south and it floods. Specifically, it floods all of the low lying parts of Pakistan, which is where all of the agriculture is, where all the people is.
Yes.
Like
all of the parts of the country that are habitable have been flooded.
Yes, yeah. Like officially, something like 1 in 7 Pakistanis have been like affected by this. I think that's a huge underestimate.
That's an underestimate, very much so. Yeah, this is kind of and 1 in 7 means a lot of other people are going to start hurting because basic services are going to break down.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, this is very difficult to understate how bad this is for Pakistan. I mean, this is like a crazy event. This is like, imagine if, I don't know, the entire East Coast of the United States was hit by a Category 5. That would be about the like from like Washington to New York City. That's about the scale of this disaster.
It's one of those sort of like apocalyptic sort of higher order things that like presents a serious threat to the governability and habitability of the country.
I'm thinking, what about just malaria, dengue fever, diphtheria, everything bad?
Tetanus.
We'll get there. Yeah, because right now the death toll is like 1,200, which is terrible. However, it hasn't stopped raining.
Right.
As of Friday, they were still telling people to evacuate because the Indus River is going to flood again.
Jesus, wow. Execute Kylie Jenner by running her over with her own private jet is what I'm saying. Believe that if you have to.
I read somewhere that Pakistan is responsible for something like 0.7% of global CO2 emissions. And if you as we were saying, if you lived in, say, Sindh, in May you're in one of the hottest places on Earth, and now you're underwater and very much at risk of getting any number of waterborne diseases. The one I was like most thinking of was cholera, and those are the ones.
Oh, there was a cholera. The cholera outbreak was in Yemen. Sorry.
Yeah, but those are sort of overwhelmingly like the really big killers numerically.
Right.
So
you're not going to have food. So congratulations, you're dying of God knows what.
I was about to say you got a lot of fields underwater on account of this. A lot of crops are just going to be unharvestable.
Of course, if you have cholera, there's going to be no water to drink. So congratulations.
It's fine. You just buy your grain in from Ukraine.
No, Ukraine.
The other thing is the government of Pakistan. This is going to be familiar territory to you, perhaps, but they're not very competent at the best of times. But the IMF has also been holding a bailout back from them.
Get fucked.
Essentially, like in relation to the just ousted Prime Minister Imran Khan, don't elect sports personalities as your leaders. It never works out.
Tom Brady,
And
2024.
yeah, and but in general, like this is one of those things that sort of defies individual charity, but you should still do it anyway. The UN High Commission on Refugees wants like $160 million worth of emergency funding. The link for that at least will not get Pete Buttigieg emailing you.
Yes.
Congratulations.
You get a sternly worded email from the IMF saying we can't give these people money. They have to learn.
Austerity.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't
And
work.
this is and this is, you know, at some point in your lifetime this will look quaint to you. So
Yes. Well,
don't worry. In
that
your
was-
lifetime, you will in fact live to see man-made horrors beyond your comprehension.
yes.
This is a man-made horror beyond your comprehension.
It's in our
Like,
lifetime, so don't worry, it counts.
You probably cannot get a clear understanding of this from the numbers or from news media. The totality of it fucking exceeds a lot of sort of ability to understand it.
Yeah, it's
So-
it's pretty bad.
Bad.
Not looking
More
good out
11.
there. Yeah. Well, that was the goddamn news. Okay. So
Do we want to tell them that it's going to be okay and that, like, you know,
Nah.
should we cheer them up a bit? Okay.
Fuck them.
So
Fuck
I'm like a deeply annoying pessimist, or not pessimist, optimist. Excuse me. So yeah, I honestly think it's going to be okay in the end. But the problem is that you have to deal with all the garbage first, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So.
This is the part of the podcast where we devolve into shouting.
right.
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
not to get too behind baseball here, but yeah, I've become reluctantly somewhat of an optimist because if I'm too cynical, I'll fucking kill myself, and that's not really a joke.
Right.
No, I know.
Yeah, so I just I either have to not think about it at all, or I'm like, God willing, it's gonna work out. I'm gonna do my level best to be a good person. What happens next is between I guess the universe and God. So
Smartest shit I ever did was become Muslim, right? Because what that did was essentially forestall any possibility of me killing myself. Don't know why. Not very religiously observant in a lot of other ways, but anytime I think about killing myself now, I'm like, oh, can't do that. God's gonna be mad at you. So now I just gotta deal with this shit, which is in some ways healthier, and in other ways, like, you know, it doesn't matter whether I'm an optimist or not. I'm here for the fucking duration. I'm stuck with you guys.
yeah. After my third suicide attempt, I just was like, all right, fuck it. I can't even do this right. I guess I'll try to live a healthy life. I guess.
It's like that Dorothy Parker poem, you know?
I'm here, I guess.
I just become like really existential sometimes, and then I'm like, maybe the Crystal Girls are right.
Cut it. Cut this podcast.
All right. Well, we're actually here to talk about railway electrification rather than committing suicide.
Impending suicide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why is this guy fighting for the IRA? Down here, bottom right.
They had a lot of weird splinter factions in their time.
The IRA existed in California. It's a little known fact.
Yeah.
But the R
True.
here stands for railroad.
Yes.
Let's talk about No Raid and how they did nothing wrong. Now.
Okay. Why do you electrify a railroad?
It's cool.
Keep in mind, I'm talking about. Let's pretend pollution isn't an issue. Why do you electrify a railroad?
Generally, electric locomotives are stronger than their contemporary partners.
Yes, that's a big part of it. You know, your steam locomotive was only good for about 100 miles. Then you needed rewatering or refueling. That requires a bunch of elaborate facilities. You have whole towns that spring up just to refuel steam locomotives, right? So, like Thurmond, West Virginia, famous ghost town because you know, these whole towns like disappeared the moment refueling steam locomotives is no longer an issue, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
If steam locomotives had, you know, they are high maintenance, there's lots of moving parts, right? They could really fuck up in tunnels. If you stalled out in a tunnel, you were fucked.
Congratulations.
This
You're
is why-
asphyxiating.
Yes. Well, this is
Wait, is that what this guy's deal is?
That's what that guy is. So basically, a lot of the Western railroads in the early days, and we'll get to this in one of the next slides, but basically, in the early days, the Western railroads had a lot of tunnels, and they had a lot of tunnels at high altitude that were really long. And generally, the smart thing to do you would have a tiny section of electrification where it's just like, oh, this gets you through the tunnels, and it's good. But Southern Pacific was incredibly stubborn. And they didn't want to do that because capital costs, whatever bullshit. So instead, they came up with ridiculous ideas, including stuffing a guy into an asbestos-lined bag and feeding it with oxygen while you go through a tunnel.
I would say that one of the places I least want to have asbestos is on the inside of a respirator.
Yeah.
No,
it's probably fine as long as you don't breathe it in.
Spicy air.
Just hold your breath the whole way through.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to make me anxious to think about. Let's move on.
So, steam locomotives, they're dirty, they're dangerous, they're difficult to work with at the best of times, right? So, well, there was an alternative. In 1752, Ben Franklin invented electricity, right? But
willfully disrespecting Italian month once again.
This is true. Its initial applications were kind of unclear. Like, what can you do with this? I don't know. I can make a key shine. I can shock an intern.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can kill one of Ben Franklin's friends.
Well, if you're in Iraq, you could create a battery to impress the ladies, but that's about
it. Now, in 1884, electric streetcars were demonstrated for the first time. Only a few years later, the city of Scranton, Pennsylvania, had a fully electric streetcar system. That's why they call it the Electric City.
Of Scrantonian progressivism culminating in the current president.
It's true. Richmond, Virginia was another early adopter.
Hey,
large-scale electric trains, though, were not proven feasible until the Baltimore and Ohio electrified the Howard Street Tunnel in 1895. Then the game was on, right? So your basic workings here, you have your overhead electrification system is you have this bare-ass wire, right? That's, it's a power line, right? It's held over the track at a constant elevation. It's held in place by a messenger wire. That's the upper wire, right? And that forms a catenary curve between the two catenary hangers, right? A catenary curve is just the natural curve that any string will form when it's between two supports, right? Those are the wires held in place by hangers, right? The whole shebang is usually carrying current, and that's often 25 kilovolts AC. Not always. There's lots of different electrification systems out there, but 25 kilovolts AC is the best, is the most often used one.
It's a good standard.
Yeah.
And what you do is you put a pantograph on the top of the train to pull electricity down, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And one of the hardest parts about overhead wire electrification is that you can have the hangers like Roz is talking about, but the issue with the hangers is that they can only clip onto the top and the sides of the wire, because if they're clipping onto the bottom, your pantograph will snag them. So one of the hardest parts about electrification is designing the wires in a way where the hanger and the clip doesn't go under the wire. It's only just attached to the top.
I can solve this immediately with cartoon logic, which is behind the So the pantograph just goes as normal. It smacks all of the hangers out of the way, but behind the pantograph, there's a little hand on an extendable arm that puts them back down after it.
It's the Wallace and Gromit thing, except there's
exactly.
Yeah.
So as you have higher speeds, these systems become higher maintenance. They become more complicated. In fact, at the end of the wires, in order to compensate for expansion and contraction, we have this contraption here. This keeps it at a
counterweight.
It's essentially just a counterweight, and it pulls on the contact wire in order to keep it at constant tension, regardless of the temperature, right? And that's what they. It's essentially just a pulley, and they stole some weights from Gold's Gym, and that's all it is, right?
Big weight make wire stiff. Yes.
I lift things up and put them down. But
the hot and cold days, the wire is doing sets of reps.
Yes.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah.
So lots of benefits to this electricity system, right? Especially
That's
compared to
cool.
steam locomotives. You have no fuel on board your train. That makes stuff a lot simpler. You
Yeah,
have a
but
constant.
you could have done that with the old timey thing of just having a steam plant on the line.
Yes, this is true. You could do like an atmospheric railway.
Yeah,
Shooting
bring that
some
yeah,
shit
poor
back.
Irishman through at 120 miles
That's
per
right.
hour.
yeah. You have a constant power supply, which essentially can provide arbitrary amounts of power to the train. That means you can do fun things like short-term overload of the traction motors on the train, right? You can go up to like, I think the GG1s were capable of 8,000 horsepower, but only for like
Wow.
30 seconds.
Torques. It's a lot of
Yes,
torques.
lots of acceleration there. You
It's
have
for the burnout.
you have lighter locomotives with less maintenance, at least in theory. There is an extent to which a locomotive has to be heavy in order to put traction onto the rails, right? But
This is sort of the
if you
same
have like,
concept as a pickup truck, or not a pickup truck, but a dump truck, handling much better when the sort of load is full.
yeah,
Okay.
Well, when your pickup truck does a burnout, that's cool. When a train does that, that's wheel slip, and that's
that's
bad.
wheel slip.
Yeah,
That's
no, Leone,
bad, and it's very common.
The car guy version of this is having a rear engine car that the engine and the weight is over the wheels, so when you accelerate, you do less of a burnout.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah,
Yeah. Unfortunately, my IQ is in the single digits, and I only understand vroom vroom and exhausts.
Understandable.
sometimes making the train lighter is very important in the case of like high-speed trains or like commuter trains that start and stop frequently. Then you want as light a train as possible, and then overhead electrification is very, very useful.
That's when you do all-wheel drive with EMUs.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you look at you compare a locomotive to like a subway train. That's like a muscle car versus, like a fancy European sporty type car.
M5 versus
Yeah.
Charger.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sort of
exactly.
deal.
That works.
So, you do have disadvantages, which is this stuff is expensive to put up. And electric trains are only going to be able to run on electric lines. Still much better than steam engines. And this was recognized fairly early on.
You have some problems, like if the line falls down, trains don't
Yeah.
work. If the line gets twisted, the trains don't work.
Trains don't work. Yeah.
If you snap off any of the hangers, the trains
You're
don't
having a
work.
bad time, right?
Yeah.
Question though, because I read through the notes ahead of time, like a good pupil, right? And
Yes.
there's a form of electrification that we never addressed that's very common in the UK, which is third line electrification,
Yes.
the terrifying one.
Oh, well, if
Yeah.
you want, I have a story with that if we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
I was setting
third
you
rail
up for that.
Yeah. Well, okay, then let's do that.
So I put this one together, but what Roz was saying before, the Baltimore and Ohio it was actually the first in the world to electrify, which is saying a lot for a country that doesn't have much electrification anymore. But basically, they had sort of a third rail, but it was just above the locomotive, and there was just like kind of a carrier wheel that just kind of like rode on it. And that was just a short thing for when they wanted to get out of Baltimore through one of the tunnels, and they didn't want the steam locomotives to choke out everyone and the passengers. So
I like it a hell of a lot better having the electrified rail be not where I can fall onto it, is the thing.
Oh, well, so the bottom right image is in South Jersey, and that's on the Pennsylvania Reading shorelines. And that specifically, I love that image because it's in the town where I grew up, Pittman. But the funny story about this one is it mainly had third rail, just like the British Southern trains. It mainly had third rails, just like the British Southern trains. But the funny part was, and it sucks nowadays because there's no passenger trains on this section anymore, and there's no electrification, obviously, anymore. But when these were running, they were third rail powered, but there was a section of the track that wasn't third rail powered. It had like trolley wire, so these could do both. And the reason why is because there is this town along the main line. This went from Camden to Vineland in South Jersey. And there was a town along the main line called Gloucester City. And the mayor of Gloucester City eventually banned the use of third rail because if you look up like old newspaper clippings, it fried like a dog and hurt like a kid. So not good. But the PRSL being like early 1900s railroad, and technically it wasn't even the PRSL at that point, but being like early 1900s railroad, doing the most logical things to skimp on money, they didn't put the trolley wire up for like 3 or 4 years. And instead, during that period of 3 or 4 years, they just didn't stop in Gloucester City. And they would just, before they went through Gloucester City, they would get up to about 60, 70 miles an hour. And then they would just fly through the town with no power, just exiting on the
Middle
other side.
Fingers up.
And they would just exit on the other side of Gloucester City and then get the third rail again, going probably about like 50 miles an hour, bleeding off the speed in between. But eventually, they had to put wires up because you're missing out on a few passengers there, so you might as well stop.
Yeah.
I do love that you can do that with third rail and like put in those gaps, but like, okay, but why isn't it practical? Why can't you have these big long third rail like electrified railways and save yourself all of the time and maintenance of all of these overhead lines?
Substations every 5 minutes.
It's a fun electricity problem, right? Which is, if you have modern electrification, you run at high voltages. That means you have very little current you have to deliver. That means you have very little current loss, right? If you have a third rail, it's down next to the ground, you can't do high voltages, right? Which means you need a lot more substations because you're losing a lot more current because you're pushing so much through the rail. You also can't use AC traction with those or AC current because of the skin effect, where all the current really concentrates towards the outside of the rail and then reduces the carrying capacity.
Electricity is fucking weird.
Yeah. In short, it was tried for long distance service pretty early on, and obviously it works. It works in Britain, but it's more expensive and requires more equipment than overhead line. Although it is definitely less delicate, I will give it that, and that's why they use it on like subway systems and stuff.
Okay, so it's a tool in the toolbox, right? But for like large scale, like main line railways, you need the overhead spicy cable.
Yeah,
Yes.
and some of the first implementation of that in the U.S. Would be the Pennsy on the Keystone Corridor, which they electrified that in 1915, and the Pennsy before the GG1, the Pennsy was known to have some wacky electric locomotives. They had so many like different prototypes and weird freight and passenger amalgamations of box cabs. But the funny thing about the Keystone is that picture of the GG1 is not on the Keystone. That's like one of the branch lines. But the funny thing about the Keystone is that the current electrification and the current catenary poles that exist nowadays for like SEPTA and the Keystone trains is that's the same catenary poles from like way back in the day.
They really just built like the railway in like 1910.
One time. They built it one time.
And they're like, yeah, this is good. It's fine. Nothing needs changing.
Nope.
And they were right. They were right to do it.
The funny part is that around the same time, slightly later, I think it was like 3 or 4 years later, the New Haven electrified from New Haven to New York City, and they also did AC power. But the weird part was the New Haven had these like crazy triangle catenary wires that like were suspended in this crazy like almost it looked like a trapeze sort of thing. And unfortunately, that's not there anymore because taking care of that was just way too much money. But there was a lot of different ideas in the beginning. I don't know if the wire on the Keystone is the same. It's probably not the same wire, but the catenary poles are the same wire, are the same fixtures.
The wires are essentially consumables.
Right.
Although they're copper, they're very easy to recycle.
And steel.
And that's
other why there's no electric trains in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it's why there's barely any electric trains in Britain.
There was an electric train system set up in Zimbabwe, and then then someone stole all the wires overnight.
Amazed we didn't get to that in the Rhodesia episode.
Yeah, but I didn't know about it at the time. I found it while I was researching for this one.
Just it's the law of attrition of stealing electrified wire. It's you let the first one or two guys go and they get kind of zapped, and then the rest of the guys are like, oh, my wire.
Yeah.
And I just desecrate this corpse and I'm ready to go to market.
It's a great criminal scheme for 2/3 of the guys doing it.
Exactly. And then the other the one, oh my god, one of the most common comments you see online on railroad forums, or just people that don't know about like railroad electrification or just railroad history, is that when you talk about it, they're always like, well, America is too big for electrification. Like, you can't
No, we're
do
not.
it.
Shut up.
You can't do it across the crazy distances, blah, blah, blah.
That's me. I'm saying that.
And there's two examples which I always point to. The example that's not on here right now is obviously the Soviet Union.
Yes.
I've heard of this place.
I know it's a weird country no one knows about. Existed a while ago. And then the other one is the other Soviet Union, which is the Milwaukee Road. Which the Milwaukee Road is
similarly dismal, oppressive systems characterized by authoritarian governance
that both look like Montana. Yeah. And the Milwaukee Road, little background, is a railroad that was based out of Chicago. They had a bunch of different freight lines and passenger lines radiating out of Chicago, but they had this massive brain idea that, hey, all the other kind of Western railroads that are super big and super powerful have like a connection to the West Coast. We should do that too. And they made the Pacific Extension to their network, which is basically like, it's that one time when you're playing Minecraft and you sort of walk in the straight line for a really long time. And like you look at the map later and the map looks normal except for that one straight line. That was essentially the Milwaukee Roads network, because it had this normal stuff around Chicago, then one line that just went forever in the one direction, all the way up to Seattle.
It was
the Voyager probe.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was the best engineered transcontinental line by a country mile.
You're going to start some arguments online with that.
It was, but it didn't go near anything.
Oh yeah.
So there was not a lot of online traffic. There was, if you wanted to ship something from Chicago to Seattle, it was great. But there was nothing from points in between, or very little traffic. So
Boeing wasn't invented yet. So like, why would you need to ship anything to or from Seattle?
Exactly.
This is true.
And Nordstrom was invented by then, probably.
Seattle was kind of a backwater.
Oh yeah,
still is. Fuck you, Amazon. Oh, do you have a basketball team? Oh, not anymore. It's the Howard Schultz empire. It's just little Schultzes running around.
I will never be more mad that their football team has a name now. It's not just the football team. They should have just kept that. But yeah, the Milwaukee Road, part of their main line, like I said, some of the Western railroads, mainly like the Great Northern and some of the other ones, when they went through really long tunnels, they generally tried to electrify so they could avoid just suffocating their crews in long tunnels. The Milwaukee Road took this to a longer extent, where it's just like, well, if we're going to electrify through these tunnels, we might as well electrify across this entire section. So they ended up electrifying, I think, like 460 miles through Montana and Idaho, through some of like pretty much the most like hostile terrain in certain areas. They electrified not with AC, but with 3,000 volt overhead DC. Which is an interesting choice, but it was back in the early 1900s when AC wasn't like as known. So it was sort of like the easier choice to go with. And unfortunately, unlike modern railroads nowadays, they actually used hydropower. So back in 1917, they were completely like green powered trains.
There's an apocryphal story that when the first train went over the Rocky Mountains, owing to the regenerative braking, when the train got to the end of the division, the electric company owed the Milwaukee Road something like $13.07.
It's great. And Alice, the thing you'd like about this is any rail fan kind of knows the story here, but basically, after World War II, the United States was kind of the place to go to if you wanted a really, really powerful electric locomotive. We had like
Sure.
GE, Westinghouse, and like a few other really weird ones.
Oh, did the Soviet Union buy some then?
And the Soviets were like, the Soviets were buddy buddy with us after World War II. So they were like, oh, well, can we have some of those? Because we're electrifying now that we're rebuilding. And so we build these locomotives. I forget the specific name for them, but GE builds these locomotives that have these nice streamlining with the kind of like similar kind of EF unit looking cowling on them. And we're going to ship them over to the Soviet Union. But unfortunately, in the late 40s, as you know, we kind of stopped being buddy-buddy with the Soviets. And all these locomotives that GE was going to ship over is stuck in the United States. And the Milwaukee Road and some of the other electrified Midwest Western routes were kind of like, well, I guess we should buy these and
to become the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and because they were originally destined for the Soviet Union, the American crews named them Little Joes, so the Little Stalins.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So the Little Joe is one of the most famous American electric locomotives that you can like easily point to.
Yes. So we have this big legacy of electrification, sort of in the like the late 30s through really even into the 50s. The question is, what happened? Right?
Well, Americans,
happened, Russ?
you love developing technological legacies and then destroying
And
them.
then shitting all over them, yes.
Okay.
That's what we're best at.
So let's talk about oil and the problem with oil.
Everything's going to be oil again, isn't it?
Goddamn Drake's well, you son of a bitch.
The fundamental problem with oil is that it's really good. Right?
It puts a lot of energy into
there's a lot of there's a lot of energy in a very little volume. It just comes out of the ground.
Yeah,
you drill a hole and it comes out on its own.
It doesn't kill you as much as the thing that's like an order of magnitude up in terms of energy density, which is uranium.
Yes. You know, it comes out of the ground on its own and you burn it for energy. It's basically free. A lot of times you don't even need a pump. That's changing pretty rapidly now. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Saudis are having a lot of trouble pumping oil right now, I've heard. But, you know, this is...
while it lasted, it was a great
While it
system.
lasted, it was fantastic, right?
It literally tasted sweet.
Yes. So diesel locomotives are sort of used as switching engines pretty early on because the engines are pretty weak. They were not like super duper, you know, they weren't ready for the prime time, right? It takes a while for the technology to mature until Electromotive Division, which is a division of General Motors at this time, they come out with this thing called the F unit in 1939, right? And that was when it was all over, at least for the steam locomotive. It was delayed slightly by the war, of course. And your diesel locomotive is very similar to an electric locomotive, except that there's a big diesel engine in it. That big diesel engine turns a turbine. That turbine creates electricity. Not a turbine. It turns an alternator, and then that creates electricity. It sends the electricity down to traction motors that are in the wheels, right?
And it makes a hell of a noise. It's really cool.
Makes a big noise. It's cool. They look great. F units look fantastic. You know, but you do carry fuel on board. You do have higher per unit maintenance costs than an electric locomotive because you got an engine in there to maintain, and engines are complicated. It also makes pollution, but railroads don't care about pollution.
No,
it makes a hell of a lot less pollution than a steam locomotive, right? The other thing is you had multiple unit control, so you could just have some cables that went from one locomotive to the other, and all these locomotives can be controlled by a guy in this cab, right? You don't, because steam locomotives, you needed a crew for each locomotive. That's why they got so invested in making really big ones. That cuts down on crew costs. Diesels, you can just lash up an arbitrary amount. Boom, you have as much power as you need.
Yeah,
right?
Thus the big long coal train that has like 5 or 6 of these at the front.
The question is, we really moved towards diesels in the United States as the primary form of motive power. This does not happen elsewhere in the world. And why is this?
Well, sticking my hand up here, you had oil. Like you
Yes.
had it like in the United States. It was just there. You didn't have to buy it from anyone.
Did have a lot of oil. It was very cheap, but I think a big aspect of it, and like Soviet Union had oil too. They still electrified. The big part of it is our railroads were largely privatized or entirely privatized, right? They were private railroad companies. They competed with each other. And I'm doing air quotes right now under competed because it was a very cartelized industry, always has, probably always will be.
And as private companies, they hate the words capital costs.
Yes. They have
recoiling in horror from spreadsheets.
Yeah, exactly. They have to not just cover their own costs, but they have to make a profit, and they have to make a really big profit, right? Investing in infrastructure does not return a profit except over some future time, which, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me worry about next quarter, please.
Sustainability of your own business is not like, that's not good business sense, caring about that.
Well, this was always a fun aspect of the Pennsylvania Railroad. They had very creative accountants, right? They called their electrification program maintenance, right? Which thus allowed them to count it as operations spending as opposed to capital spending. And that meant, of course, they could just say, well, we took a pretty big loss this quarter. I guess we're not going to pay taxes. Now, the ICC cracked down on this at some point, and the pace of electrification slowed dramatically after that.
International Criminal Court?
The Interstate Commerce... The Interstate Commerce Commission. And there's this sort of general expectation that in the industry that electrification was inevitable even into the 1950s. Even with the cheap oil, it was still cheaper to operate electric locomotives than diesel ones, right? But no one wanted to be the first railroad to make the investment, right? The industry as a whole, it's sort of like, you know how penguins will crowd at the edge of a cliff until one of them falls off.
Waiting for someone to go.
Yeah, and then one of them falls off, and the rest of the penguins see if they get eaten by an orca or not, right? To see if
railroads work similarly.
Yeah. Railroads work very similarly. They were all crowding up to the edge, but someone had to go first because there was
to get eaten by an orca.
To get eaten by an orca or not, likely not. I think if anyone had electrified at this point, they would be a dominant player in the industry basically forever.
They all scared each other out of it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the only railroad with like a really there was a couple. The Milwaukee Road had an electric district. The Pennsylvania had an electric district. But that was really, that all of these were like short sections of much larger railroads as opposed to, a wide scale electrification program. And I think if the Pennsylvania Railroad had got the wires as far as Pittsburgh, we'd be living in a very different world.
Yeah, it's that, and if the Milwaukee ended up electrifying all the way to Chicago,
other railroads would have been forced to make these investments once someone had dramatically lower operating costs as a result. In the meantime, while the industry is psyching itself out of this, diesel electric technology rapidly advances. You got bigger and more powerful locomotives. A good deal of the benefits of electrification are realized simply by doing nothing, right? But this takes decades, right? And even modern diesels aren't capable of some of the stuff that early electric locomotives could do, like regenerative braking or short-term overload traction motors or something like that. They do have regenerative systems. It's just that they can't use that electricity. They just burn it off in a big radiator in the back of the locomotive.
It's literally, it's another lost technology.
Yes.
Great.
I miss curbs.
Me too. I think we all do.
Yeah. We have this big locomotive industry for a long time. You have electromotive division of General Motors. You have GE Transportation. For a while, you have Alco and Baldwin Lima, right? Note that Lima Locomotive Works is in Lima, Ohio. It's Lima in Ohio, but Lima in Peru. So
this country will never make sense. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. They provide all kinds of motive power, right? And And it looks like, okay, maybe this dieselization thing is here to stay until the energy crisis.
Oh yeah, that thing where everybody realized that, hey, maybe we need to come up with alternate sources of energy, and then forgot to ever do any of that.
Forgot to do it, yeah.
Crazy, because like not like something like that happened recently or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the 70s and 80s, there was kind of a re-push, mainly the 70s, but there was kind of a re-push to electrify stuff again. The map that's shown up here, it says 70s, but some of these like routes were from older sections from when they've just were talking about it forever. Like obviously the Harrisburg to Pittsburgh section is there that the Pennsy wanted to do forever.
Sad.
The big ones though are the longer distance ones that either the Santa Fe, the Southern Pacific routes wanted to be. Specifically, like the one in the image in here is a E60 or E60 concept image for the Southern Pacific. And what's sad about these is that a lot of the manufacturers at the time really thought that this would happen, because not only did they create like concept images and everything, they actually GE started building like E60s, which are the electric freight locomotives. And they had like actually like a backlog of these things for a bit because they thought these electrification things were going to happen. And they built a lot of they built a decent number of these E60s, and then suddenly they realized like, oh, I guess this isn't going to happen.
We made the commercial mistake of thinking that anything was going to get better.
Yes.
Yeah, and they haphazardly sold these to Amtrak and the National Railroad of Mexico later on in like the late 80s, 90s. Amtrak, it wasn't the best locomotive for Amtrak because it was a freight locomotive that was like kind of adapted to be a passenger locomotive.
Kind of.
I love the E60s. They're bricks. They look good, but just they weren't the best passenger locomotives. And yeah, it's frustrating because like the Santa Fe route, the long one from Chicago to LA, almost happened. It was so close to being happened. And if you talk to any like older boomer foamer or boomer historian around that era, this is like their terrible like 9/11 moment because it went as far as getting like there was a whole energy bill that basically went through the Senate and House in the 70s, and a big portion of it was passed, but then a section of it later was trying to get passed, and it got all the way to Reagan's desk. And unfortunately, as we know, when you look back, everything bad happened around Reagan, and Reagan vetoed that section of the bill.
This was the specific point of divergence that set us onto the bad timeline.
Yes. Yeah, and the Reagan era and the 80s in general just saw kind of a like disinvestment in infrastructure and like disregarding highways because highway, but like the everything else, everything else was sort of kind of put on the back burner. Like we don't need to spend money on that. No, it's fine. But yeah, every manufacturer sort of got into this. I mean, along with GE, EMD also built some test units. The one here in the middle image with sort of the yellow and gray sort of primer scheme is a test unit that was sent to the Pennsy, later Conrail, Penn Central and then Conrail, to test to replace their E44s. And they were actually fantastic. And if you read about them, they were really good. There was also a second unit that was built that had a weird truck configuration. It had a BBB truck configuration, meaning there was 3 trucks with one in the middle. I always do not like that truck configuration because that's like a mechanical standpoint. What happened when go around corner? I don't like it.
Yeah.
don't worry about it, you know?
Yeah, but
go slower.
Yeah. It's they were really good though because they were really powerful and really reliable, but it's just like EMD realized with Conrail that the electrification probably wasn't going to get expanded, nor was it probably going to continue because later on Conrail and Amtrak kind of had problems working together with each other because generally you should separate freight and passenger lines. So Conrail was sort of inadvertently kicked off of the Northeast Corridor, and thus they had a lot less electrification miles. So they switched over to diesel instead, and actually dewired a good portion of their network. And you can still see a lot of these old electrified sections. Mainly the one of the longest ones is the Port Road section, which is from the mouth of the Susquehanna all the way to Harrisburg. That was all electrified, and now it's not.
Yes.
But yeah, this was like the one hopeful moment that kind of was dashing and passing in American railroading. So
Could have
yeah,
had something nice, but
Yeah. Could have had something nice, but nope.
could
But
have
nope,
had
we
some
can't.
sort of pleasant bricks.
Yeah.
No,
but,
fuck you.
Sort of this
Mhm.
this did
You're in
get
America. You don't get anything nice. You don't get healthcare, but we do get a shit ton of B2s.
Yes. So you have, I mean, this is how close you got. This is actually a section of catenary the Union Pacific put up. I forget exactly when, but it was probably 70s, 80s. And this was just a test section to see how it would handle in the desert, right? And of course, underneath that, we have the big FEF steam locomotive on an excursion. Probably the only time you'll see that locomotive under wire. You complain about diesels under wire. Here's a steam locomotive under
well,
wire.
if it shows up in Denver, you might.
That's a good point. Yeah. Now this thing called climate change is happening now, right? It has been happening for quite a while, and railroads are already an extremely environmentally friendly way to ship pretty much everything. Probably a good idea to consider the environmental damage caused by burning so much diesel, right?
Sure.
Now-
But as you say, a diesel train is like a million times better than a shitload of trucks to transport.
This is
the
true.
same
This
thing.
is absolutely true. But
the most
top-
polluting diesel train that you could make.
I think Tom Coletti and I did we did some back of the envelope math about transporting the relative environmental impact of a steam locomotive with X number of passenger cars versus transporting those people in Teslas. And
Oh, wow.
it breaks even at around 10 cars. It was very back of the envelope math, though. It wasn't like a serious thing. Anyway, so top 3 diesel consumers in the world in reverse order: Union Pacific Railroad, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, and the U.S. Army. So there is a lot of room to improve through electrification of railroads, but at this point, there's lots of excuses not to electrify conventionally, right?
Capital costs.
So
Well,
we're working on electrifying the U.S. Army first.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna put up trolley poles for the tanks. We're gonna have a trolley M4.
It's a big extension cord.
Wait, no, is the Abrams M4 or M1?
M1.
M1,
M1.
excuse me.
Everything in the Army is M1.
It's M1.
Yeah.
The M is for military.
Yeah, and the one is for it is the one thing that they use.
That's
Yes.
the first one.
Yeah.
Yes. So, all right, you got some issues here, and a lot of them are caused by excess height cars, right? You got clearance issues. Lots of clearances need to be raised to accommodate wires, right? You can see this is a double stack container train, right? And it's very tall because there's two containers stacked on top of each other.
And it's
Now-
making me nervous because it's right up close to the thing.
It is
Yep.
right up close to the
That's
wires.
impossible.
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
And this is it's generally a
Double
You know,
stack under wire, impossible. This
it
is a
can
fake
be done.
image.
it can be done. The issue is a lot of the United States has railroads which are currently, you're up at the bleeding edge of the tallest cars you can shove through a tunnel or under a bridge, right? This is a diagram here of AAR plate H, right? Plate H allows for cars up to 20 feet tall. Yeah. So, there was a lot of headroom on a lot of lines, and railroads decided to capitalize on that. Stacking containers too high on a train is more efficient than one high. You can get double the amount of containers on the same train. Less than double, actually, because the cars need to be longer because there's a well so the lower container can sit lower, right? But they made use of all this headroom. that means there's not enough room for wires without a lot of expensive infrastructure investment to raise clearances even higher than they already are.
Capital
You might have,
costs.
pretty serious capital costs in, at least in urban areas. Yes, I think in more rural areas, like I bet you could probably go from like Omaha to like Denver and like raise like 3 overpasses total. But
Oh yeah.
it's probably
that's still externalities.
that's an externality. Yeah. So, well, no, actually, that's not an externality because the railroad would have to pay for that.
That's I don't know anything.
It's the opposite of an externality.
Internality.
Exoality.
Yeah. So every overpass and tunnel really becomes a chore if you want to keep using excess height cars. One solution, of course, would be to stop using excess height cars, but railroads really don't want to do that, right?
Railroads give up on all those containers of sex asses.
Yeah. Well, you have to run. You have to run more trains, and we'll get to that being a problem in the next slide. Railroads really like their double stacks and their auto racks and their excess height box cars to the point where Nacional de Mexico, in obviously Mexico,
ripped out the wires, baby.
Yeah, they electrified its very high density freight corridor between Mexico City and Querétaro.
Yeah,
they were also going to electrify a line from the Pacific to the Gulf Coast to do like a competitive Panama Canal sort of thing. But that's another story.
That is another story. But okay, so they got this line up and running. They're going to extend that further as well. They had 2 pretty nasty accidents pretty early on, which was not good. This whole charade is going to be an episode at some point I want to do, but pretty shortly afterwards, pretty shortly afterwards, this whole thing was privatized. The railroads were privatized, and the new owner, which was TFM, I forget what that stood for, but it was pretty quickly changed to pretty quickly changed to Kansas City Southern de Mexico
and Ferromex.
Yes, and they pulled down the wires that were brand new so they could run double stacks on that line.
God damn it.
Yeah. And double stacks are not incompatible with wires, as a lot of railroads would have you believe when you're talking about transit projects. It's perfectly fine as long as the wires are high enough. But this is a big excuse not to electrify it conventionally, is that clearances are going to be an issue. In addition to just the upfront capital cost is a lot, right? Even though you get much reduced operating costs afterwards, and eventually you're going to amortize this investment. Like, it's not
improving my railroad impossible.
Yes,
an industry that for 100 years has been like, no, I would rather have 1 cookie now than 2 in 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long history of self-sabotage on American railroads, which is the subject of this slide.
I'm enjoying the locomotive graveyard here.
Oh yeah. This is Larry's Truck and Electric.
It's like a used car lot, which I guess it kind of is.
That's basically what it is. Yeah.
God damn, cash for clunkers ruined this country.
Yeah, bring a flat car.
Yeah. So the state of the American railroad industry today it's pretty borked, right? A lot of this has to do with a management concept called precision scheduled railroading.
Longtime enemy of the pod.
Longtime enemy of the pod, yes. And a lot of this is not especially new. And a lot of the problems with PSR are not necessarily how it is, how the management philosophy, so much as how it's been implemented, right?
Yes, poorly.
Very badly. They implement a lot of the bad stuff and avoid the good stuff, right? To paraphrase Voltaire, it's neither precision nor scheduled nor railroading. But you sort of start with good ideas, right? We're going to precisely schedule trains. That means we have better personnel and equipment utilization because everything is scheduled and predictable, right? And then simply fails to deliver on that. So trains get much longer. They get more irregular. right?
Where did this idea of PSR come from? Because like, did they steal this from the airline industry, or was it
what's
just
his
like,
name?
oh, we should put it on a computer? Where does this come from? Where does this originate?
So this is from, I want to say,
I'm
hold
sorry, I
on.
don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Here.
So sort of the Lenin of PSR is Ewing Hunter Harrison, right?
Hunter Harrison, you son of a bitch.
And he was CEO of the Illinois Central, and he was one of the first people to push this idea. We're going to precisely schedule trains. We're going to do all this other stuff that gets us the most out of our infrastructure, gets the most out of our people, gets the most out of our equipment. Remove all this sort of mishmash, right? And it works really well on the Illinois Central. But eventually he gets higher positions, and on more complicated railroads, it sort of devolves into cost cutting. And so this was sort of like you have a great idea, and then it starts to fall apart under conditions of, in this case, investors complaining, stuff like that.
Perestroika.
Yeah, basically. So
you look at this inefficient system and you're like, we can make some efficiency savings here. And the minute you try and do any of that, the whole thing collapses because it turns out that it's actually been built on a bedrock of inefficiency.
This is true. And I mean, you can look at like the physical infrastructure of any railroad and say there are a lot of improvements to be made here.
It's a Jenga block of horror shows, Alice.
The big issue is that PSR, as it's been implemented, does not include infrastructure improvements. But it does rely a lot on technology, which was sort of developed in this same period. We're talking
technology was invented in this period.
Yeah, technology was invented sort of around like 1980, right?
By atom technology.
Yes, atom technology, yes.
Generally, PSR good. Just how they run it with zero infrastructure bad.
Because the thing is that
eliminate him.
True PSR has never been tried.
That's
actually
basically
not
accurate.
Entirely true, because a lot of the older railroads did have something similar to PSR, but they actually had good infrastructure. So
yes, so you have new technology like distributed power units. That's a DPU. You put a locomotive in the middle of the train, and it's controlled by radio from the front of the train. That means even your older main lines with lots of curves could now handle very, very long freight trains without having like a string line derailment or something like that. That's when just the length of the train.
Talk to Norfolk Southern about that.
Yeah. That's when just like the length of the train and the in-train forces cause some cars in the middle to flip over on a curve.
Put center beam cars in the front.
Sort of a Kerbal space program sort of problem of like, this thing is too big to be structurally processed anymore.
Goes outside the physics range.
Yeah.
You have infrastructure investment deferred. You have the reverse of infrastructure investment. For instance, you have capacity added through longer trains rather than through more track and more trains. And this causes a sort of paradoxical effect where there's more congestion with fewer trains on the tracks while still reducing crew hours.
It's like a magic trick.
It's amazing. It honestly is amazing.
It is the ultimate bean counter, like circle jerk. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I have sort of a simplified example here. Let's say I got to move 150 cars each way over a section of railroad, which takes about one shift to cover, like one crew shift, right?
It's getting uncomfortably close to the nightmare about me having a train is heading towards whatever at 40 miles an hour exam question, and I haven't revised.
This is similar, right? Okay. So let's say some of this line is double track, then it goes down to single track, and I have a number of passing sidings, right, along this route, and then I get to my terminal, right?
But why does the siding have to pass? Really, isn't that a regressive expectation?
Just no clip through the other train.
We'll get to that.
What? How?
Yeah. So these passing sidings have a length of 75 cars, right? So the old way to do this is you run 4 trains of 75 cars, 2 each way, right?
Sure.
And then, they pay 4 crews 1 day of pay each, right? And that's pretty good. Everything gets there on time. Everyone's happy. Now we have precision scheduled railroading. We now have the capability of running longer trains, but our passing sidings are the same length, right?
Oh God, I see immediately where this is going.
Yes.
Yep.
You run 2 trains, double the
Yes.
length, but they can't pass each other.
Exactly. You run 2 trains, they're double the length, right? You call up 2 crews. One crew takes 1 train all the way to the end of the division, right? The other crew takes the other train to the end of the double track and then sits and waits, right?
They do this a lot.
And they sit there and twiddle their thumbs for like 6 hours, right?
Jesus.
The other train makes it the full length of the trip. The crew on the stop train times out, and the railroad calls up a new crew at 3:00 in the morning to take the first train to the end of the line.
Wait, but I see the magic trick here. This is way worse, but you're paying for 3 days of train crews instead of 4.
Yes.
Oh my God!
You've cut costs by 25% simply by having
Congratulations,
one
Alice.
crew do nothing.
Oh my God! I feel like I've just seen the Prestige. What?
And at the same time, your freight arrives 1 day later.
Yeah, and you're
Exactly.
using like half of your like infrastructure. What do you
All
call
you
an
have to
act
do-
like that?
Efficiency.
Yeah.
We call it the aristocrats, Alice.
Yeah, apparently.
All you have to do is to increase congestion on the network and pay a railroad crew to do nothing, and the railroad has saved 1 full day of pay.
I am
Now,
it's a
if you're not-
businessman doing business.
exactly, I'm doing business here. This is deals. This is some deals right here. Now, let's say we add an Amtrak train to this mix. By the way, if you're more of a passenger guy than a freight guy here. Now, prior to the longer trains, any of these passing sidings could be used to stop and let the Amtrak train pass.
Yeah, you can
Or
just weave it straight
for the-
through the middle of them.
Yeah, exactly. Now that there's trains longer than the passing siding, the Amtrak train is still shorter than the passing siding, which means it always has to stop. There's no possibility to delay the freight train, even if it's like empty coal cars or something.
But Roz, this is when I reply to you on Twitter and say, but there's a government mandate that says the freight trains have to get out of the way of Amtrak.
Well, they don't fucking listen, Alan.
How are they going to? Even if they wanted
they
to,
can't. They literally cannot. Even if you wanted to dispatch to prioritize the Amtrak train, you now cannot do it. Right?
But the law says
The law says one thing, but it doesn't regulate the size of trains.
yeah.
It's
So-
a classic. It's a loophole. It honestly.
I
is.
know. It's just you have to explain all of this to someone, and it's like the levels of things you have to explain to answer one simple question. And it's like,
Yes.
Why is my
So-
train late? Okay, so imagine I have to ship 150 boxcars full of sex asses. You might want to
Yeah.
sit down. I'm going to get you a piece of paper and a pencil.
and this is something that if PSR was like properly implemented, you would be running trains to make the most of your infrastructure without causing all these delays. They would run on a actual precision schedule, right? And you would be making spot infrastructure improvements. Like, I don't know, maybe I join up 2 of these passing sidings. Boom! Now I have room for the big long train. And everyone.
I run some of the 75 car trains like slightly closer together, even.
Yeah, or you and if you could run 250 car trains and have this long passing siding, that's actually 2 days of pay for the crew as opposed to 3, right? But that does require you to put track down, which you don't want to do, right?
Money.
You're also also missing one of the most annoying parts for the crew is that since you're in this long land barge that's stuck out in the middle of nowhere and you clock out, you then have to get a shitty van back from
Yes.
your train to either a local hotel or all the way back to your like base of operations. So then a good part of your shift is just riding like an hour or 2 in like a van.
And another good part of it is sitting there in a train where legally you have to pay attention and you can't have like be on your phone or whatever Well,
Yes.
like, as a matter of design, nothing happens.
Oh well,
Yes.
once they call it tied down, which is basically your train is stationary and you have all the brakes on, you're technically allowed to like look at stuff that isn't in front of you. I've seen a friend of mine that literally has like he brings like model trains with him and he'll like airbrush like decals on them just waiting for a shift to be over.
Incredible.
Yeah.
This is my toy cart. This is my real cart. This is my toy cart. This
Exactly.
is my real cart.
You have some long-term effects from infrastructure pruning. Some of this was done in like the 60s and 70s when railroads were in like a pretty shitty place, right? But you also have stuff that's designed to, let's say, let excess height cars through. Like I believe down here, I want to say this is the Howard Street Tunnel. It may not be though. This used to be a 2-track tunnel, right? But because they want higher cars in and it has an oval cross section at the top, they simply got rid of one of the tracks and put the other track in the center.
God.
Right. And this is a fun one because there's one of these in Philly. It goes underneath the art museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
CSX will park trains there, like just blocking the railroad crossing to get to the Schuylkill River Trail for like hours and hours and hours and
And
hours.
then Roz can't ride his bike.
Yeah, but also it's idling. You have this like 4 idling diesels in this. Yeah.
Just sitting there,
And
yeah.
it's in like a very much a residential neighborhood. There's a bunch of high rises right there, and it's pretty crazy, right? You also have weird forms of pruning. One thing that's very expensive to maintain comparatively are switches, right? So this is Thurmond, West Virginia, up here, right? This used to be a very important line for coal. Now, not so much. But you have a double track main line throughout. But here at Thurmond, because one of the tracks goes off one way, the other track goes off the other way, they rejoin eventually, and that's the Yogi Berra fork in the road. When you get there, take it. But sometimes you want to route trains one way or the other way, so there used to be a crossover here. Now, in order to do a crossover, of course, you need 4 switches, right? Or what they did here is they got rid of 2 of those switches by just having the line go down to 1 track and then back up to 2 tracks.
Oh my God.
Now,
This is
at the cost of just a little bottleneck, you save 2 switches.
This is like it's one step away from fucking Fitzcarraldoing a train full of empty coal cars.
Don't worry. In a minute, we're gonna get to the Flintstones car where the railroaders have to do it with their
don't
feet.
worry when you have 2 trains on the same team, they can clip through each other.
And there's this big disconnect here between like infrastructure pruning and sort of these long, slow trains. And there's a surge in railroad traffic at the same time, right? With like the fracking boom,
when we decided to
discovery
make
of
it worse.
Yeah, you have like lots and lots of crude oil by rail, all this stuff. All that stuff is fine to ship at like slow speeds, because it doesn't go bad. It's been in the ground for a couple million years.
Yeah, what if we can get oil but also cause earthquakes?
Yes, and then this infrastructure is immediately very strained. But also in terms of like manufacturing, while we're doing all this infrastructure pruning and making the trains longer, everyone's moving to just-in-time shipping, right? Which means that
Has nothing to do with Roz.
if the railroads are becoming more unreliable, it's very difficult to ship high-value goods by rail anymore. All that stuff moves to trucks, right? So the railroads are really painting themselves into a corner here where the only thing that's good to ship by rail are like bulk commodities or like stuff like paper, stuff like that, where it doesn't matter how long it's in transit.
Rapidly approaching British rail sectorization here.
It's something wild that if you like, there's some like figure out there that's like 40% of all freight in the United States moves by like rail or something like that, but that is ton miles. And if you remove the heavy stuff, the heavy stupid stuff like gravel and coal, it goes down to some like either single digit or like in the teens of actual stuff we move on rail.
Oh yeah, by weight it's a lot. By value, not so much.
Exactly.
So And then, of course, a lot of that stuff is also fossil fuel related, which theoretically, in our green electric future, would be traffic that would dry up.
Yeah, we don't
You know,
want
with
that
the
oil. We don't want that coal.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, you
'cause,
might be still shipping some metallurgical coal, and that'd be it.
Because one of the funny things we always joke about, like East Coast railroads, is there were so many East Coast railroads back in the early 1900s that were literally just built as coal conveyor belts to cities, and that's all they were. So when people are always like nostalgic for like said railroad, say like the Lackawanna or something, and it's like, well, the whole point of that was just to move coal from coal mines to city, and like, yeah, there should be passenger stuff on it maybe, but like the whole point of the railroad is kind of gone now.
Mhm. The other effect of this is, of course, it's taken a big toll on employees.
Mm.
Number one, they've been cutting huge amounts of staff, cutting lots of engineers, lots of conductors, cutting all kinds of positions everywhere because they're just not needed anymore. Because if we can run a big, stupid, slow train, we don't need as many people, right?
Sure.
We also start putting people onto the extra board, right? Which, if you're a senior engineer, you get the few scheduled trains out there. And if you're like a junior person, you get the shit work, right?
Ugh.
And that,
Right.
if you're on the extra board, you can basically be called up at any time to take a train from your terminal to anywhere else with very short notice.
Yeah.
And
So
they could call you up at 3 a.m. They could call you up like, I don't know, maybe you're with your buddies at the bar because you thought, it looked like you're going to have the day off. Nope. Too bad.
yeah,
You got to sober up and get out here now.
basically how like most
yeah.
railroad jobs work is that you're on like 5 days a week, and during those 5 days you can just get a call on your phone at any time of the day 4 hours before your shift that tells you you're going to have to come in.
And there is it's
Ridiculous.
very much it's very similar to how the service industry is starting to work now,
Mm.
where schedules are like arbitrary in order to like optimize for when there's the most customers or whatever, and no one knows what their actual shift is going to be until right before it
Yeah,
happens.
precision,
right?
precision scheduled waiting.
Yes, exactly.
much, yeah.
And again, you got in-cab surveillance now, so it's not like you're gonna go on your phone, or maybe maybe you play with your model trains. I don't know. You also have stuff like auto throttle now. You have fuel
Oh,
economy
God.
systems, which really slow the trains down.
Yeah, so auto throttle basically is the railroad's attempt to techify fuel usage. So normally when you're driving a train and you're an engineer that does engineer things and knows like the layout of the track that you're running on, you know when to throttle up, you know when to throttle down, you know when to dynamic brake, you know when to do certain things just to efficiently run the train at a certain speed, and because you know what's coming up next. But instead, a lot of what the railroads do nowadays is there's this like auto throttle that like they force the engineers to use. It's basically a computer that tries to do the same thing. But the problem is that the computer is optimizing for fuel usage. So what it does,
So like an early CVT.
yeah, and what it does is that it essentially will run the train at like half speed, because basically the slower you run something, usually the more efficient it is. So these trains that would normally go like 40, 50 miles an hour are going like 25 miles an hour. And you talk to any of these engineers that run these trains, they fucking hate the computer.
It also doesn't really work. Is the other
No.
thing?
It's only like one of the engineers I talked to that has to deal with these. He told me that they only save like 2 or 3% fuel burn. Like it's not like substantial.
There's an old joke, old railroader joke. One day, a conductor came into the office one day right before his shift was to start. He found out the railroad had saved a whole bunch of money by eliminating the engineer and replacing him with a monkey. Right.
Mm.
So, and he's like, how come the engineer is replaced by a monkey, but I'm not? He's really getting worried for his job security. So anyway, he boards the train with his monkey, right? And there's a little display in the locomotive now, and the display tells the monkey, okay, this is your throttle position. This is where you need to be. This is when you need to brake. The monkey's well trained. He knows exactly what's going on. And the conductor's getting more and more worried. He's like, what am I here for? what is my job now? I'm like, he's like, really, like, what's going to happen? And then suddenly he didn't notice there was a display on his side too. It lit up and it said, "Feed the monkey." Anyway, that's auto throttle.
Yup.
So, you know, a lot of these working condition issues are why there's going to be that huge railroad strike in 14 days now. This is a, you know,
Yay!
this is, you know, it's not just about pay. It's about just the working conditions have become impossible, right?
Yeah.
It's just, it's not no longer like a sustainable job for a human being to do.
Mm.
Right. Thanks for nothing, Warren Buffett.
Ironically, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which is the one Warren Buffett owns, they have not formally adopted precision scheduled railroading, but they have some of the
They
worst
just
working
drive them into the
conditions.
ground anyway.
No,
yeah.
it's funny because BNSF is the one that's slightly better than the other three. So yeah, it's
Right.
And by
Well, they got
slightly
that-
better, it's like, wow, we actually attempt to do certain things, and that's not setting a high standard.
They were also trying to push that insane attendance policy that
Oh yeah,
is really what got
Yes,
this
yes.
strike going. So anyway, a lot of this stuff starts to come in the 90s where we're using less locomotives, we're using less trains to haul the same amount of stuff in a lot worse way than we used to. And this happens right after the railroads went on a motive power buying spree, right?
Is that how
So we
you
have
get
this-
the big used car lot full of trains?
Yes.
Mhm.
You know, there was this boom bust cycle. There was a lot of equipment ordered to handle back and crude, fracked gas, Powder River Basin coal, stuff like that. Very shortly after all this equipment is procured, PSR goes mainstream. You have this huge motive power surplus. No one's ordering any new locomotives because there are so many of them just lying around, right?
Because you don't need them because
Um,
you're running these giant, long, stupid trains.
Exactly, right. And you're
Mhm.
running them with maximum fuel economy. So you're running like a train with 3 locomotives and 150 cars, and you can do it because there's a locomotive in the middle and one at the end as well as one at the front. And new locomotives start getting more complicated and more expensive, right? The EPA starts to crack down on non-road diesel emissions after 2004. They phase in several tiers of emission standards over time, ending with tier 4.
Basically, the government told diesel manufacturers that they were like, "Hey, you actually have to try to innovate now."
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
I-
turning the big economic imperative back on.
The pretty stark difference between we see this old Metra diesel locomotive here, big cloud of black smoke coming out, versus this nice new clean modern M-Track locomotive from Siemens, which is, you know, you can see a bit of heat haze above it, and that's about it.
The Metra locomotive is a tier 0 or tier 0 plus locomotive, and then the Siemens Charger is a tier 4. So you can see the NOx emissions in the one chart that show the amount compared to each other.
Yes.
Isn't nitrous oxide one of the like really, really you could have essentially none of this in the atmosphere kind of?
It's a big smog
Yeah.
producer. That and your sulfur dioxides and your nitrous oxides, those are criteria pollutants. Particulate matter is another one.
It's that, and it's nitrous oxide basically causes like the acid rain type stuff, and it's also one of the that and particulate matter are just like if you live next to this area, you are guaranteed to have like asthma, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the new diesels, they're more efficient. They're much more efficient. Like the technology got a lot better pretty quickly, but they're also more expensive, right? And again, there's
capital
all
costs.
these locomotives lying around. I don't need to buy a whole bunch of new ones, right? The result of this is that the locomotive industry sort of rapidly collapses. Electromotive division is bought by Caterpillar 2004. GE Transportation holds out for a while. They're sold off to Wabtec in 2019, right? The financial crisis of 2008, of course, exacerbated these problems. These companies are sort of mined for assets, right? And there's no they become zombie companies, right?
Yeah, especially EMD. Like from a mechanical perspective, EMD was always fucked because like this is a car thing, Liam, so you get this. But GE always had prime movers that were 4-stroke engines, and 4-strokes are notoriously a lot easier to have better emissions on, where EMD had 2-stroke prime movers. So essentially, when these EPA regulations went into effect, AMD was kind of fucked from the start because they mainly developed 2-stroke engines. So
and if you move to 4-stroke, that's essentially having your power density like right off the bat.
And you can tell the difference between like a locomotive that uses a 4-stroke and a 2-stroke, because the 4-stroke will sound like the typical like brr, 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 and then the 2-stroke will sound like a giant chainsaw. This is like like that's the main difference.
And they start moving production to non-union plants.
Awesome.
And the build quality kind of tanks, especially for EMD. No one wants to buy any locomotives. You can barely purchase any new mainline freight locomotives in America today, and no one really wants to.
And the crazy part is like these charts show is that the EPA has mandated a tier 4 since like 2013, 2014. But if you look at that chart with the adoption rate, you can see that the green on the top of the list is tier 4, and you can see that it's barely part of the fleets of these railroads nowadays.
Yes.
It's and you can see that the tier 0 still exist. Like they're not, they haven't disappeared.
Hi, it's Justin. So this is a commercial for the podcast that you're already listening to. People are annoyed by these, so let me get to the point. We have this thing called Patreon, right? The deal is you give us $2 a month, and we give you an extra episode once a month. Sometimes it's a little inconsistent, but it's $2. You get what you pay for. It also gets you our full back catalog of bonus episodes, so you can learn about exciting topics like guns, pickup trucks, or pickup trucks with guns on them. The money we raise through Patreon goes to making sure that the only ad you hear on this podcast is this one. Anyway, that's something to consider if you have $2 to spare each month. Join at patreon.com/WTYP pod. Do it if you want. Or don't. It's your decision, and we respect that. Back to the show.
Yeah, there was this was sort of inadvertent problem from environmental regulations. I mean, I think we do talk about that a lot in this program is stuff like how Wyoming was able to supply all the nation's coal because it was technically slightly better under EPA regulations. This is sort of another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that environmental regulations are bad. It's just that
you have to cover every loophole or they will be ruthlessly exploited.
Exactly.
Or you have to punish them, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, none of it seems to really be outcomes based. It seems to be a little more procedural.
Hey, you guys should do this. Okay.
When Pete Buttigieg emails you to be like, hey, I need you.
Hey, you up?
Reply back. Hey, you should do something about this shit.
Yeah.
Wow, the Secretary of Transportation should give a shit about trains? No fucking way.
Anyway, now that we're an hour and 32 minutes into the program, let's talk about batteries.
Batteries.
How do they work?
It's
what I would call
a safe and legal thrill to throw your car batteries into the ocean.
Recharge the eels. Come on.
So I would say what I would call like the autonomous battery future, right? The autonomous battery future and its consequences has been a disaster for the human race.
Oh, 100%. I highly endorse Paris Marx's new book about, like, in large part, why the electric car is, not the silver bullet that it's often imagined to be.
We should have him on the show sometime.
Why do I have to buy a new watch every 4 years? Why do I buy headphones that have batteries that are not? Give me the option to swap out the battery like I had on my Samsung S2.
And then throw that used battery into the ocean.
Right into the ocean.
Just give me a trolley headphones.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of, that's just headphones with a cord. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a pantograph on these.
I'll use that with my my phone that doesn't have a headphone jack, Roz.
Yeah.
Because Tim Cook was brave, Roz.
Oh my God. I mean, so
Inspiring.
this is sort of too broad of a topic to fully cover here, but there's like this sort of, as the autonomous battery future comes upon us, I don't think the autonomous part will happen, but the battery part might. You sort of look at, there's this ideological opposition to any infrastructure investment. You really focus on vehicles instead of what they run on, right? Everyone wants these autonomous cars, but they don't want any infrastructure to support them, which is pretty
Capital
crazy.
costs? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
And it's a pretty crazy thing when, okay, back in 1997, there was, I want to say, the Automated Highway Institute developed a system using Buicks of automated cars in dedicated lanes on California freeways. They did a demonstration pilot, and the one thing you had to do was you had to punch a nail into the highway every foot so the cars knew where they were, right? And then they were able to demonstrate all this stuff that's been promised by autonomous car companies for ages, like platooning cars, having cars join and leave platoons seamlessly, all this stuff. All you needed was nails. And I think the nails had like an RFID thing on them. Anyway, that went nowhere. We're not even willing to invest that much in infrastructure for an autonomous vehicle.
No, they have to be. They have to be able to work on regular roads, which have not been changed at all, and also have not been maintained, so they're falling apart.
This is true. This is true.
But if you have a universal thing that all vehicles can use, how can I make money off of not using my priority? I cannot think of the word. By selling my janky system that cannot work with anything else, but only works with my vehicles.
A system that actually doesn't work at all. I mean, in the case of
Ask
Tesla,
me about USB micro B now.
So
You mean
tell me about
Firewire.
USB micro B.
Proprietary.
Again,
oh God.
If you have a connector that only works for printers, you shouldn't have that connector.
Yes.
Bring back the serial
USB-C,
port. I want the
it's
big
fine.
serial port again.
RS-232, baby, let's do this.
But in the autonomous battery future, you have all these. You're going to have autonomous battery cars. You have all these individualistic solutions to problems. Like, I don't know. You're gonna replace public transportation with pods. Everyone's gonna have a pod. You have a complete abdication.
Say it louder, bestie.
Yeah. You're gonna this complete abdication of any kind of planning role for governments, right? And you really leave everything to, as Riley likes to say on Trash Future, a wizard will do it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is just the whole philosophy of like development today. It's the philosophy of everything.
Government? You mean private-public partnership?
No, I fucking don't.
And there's this fundamental expectation that we'll be able to keeping on exactly as we are. There's no great social upheaval or changes to the structure of society to avert climate change or deal with dwindling resources or stuff like this. Someone's going to sweep in with cheap batteries, autonomous cars. We'll all be rich and part of the leisure class, right?
Yeah, and the Paris Marx thing is that like your life isn't going to change that much, right? You're never going to have to confront anything. You can still drive your car. It's just going to be a slightly different type of car now.
Yes.
Changing my lifestyle to help the environment? No.
Yeah. So this applies to people, but it also applies to railroads, right?
Well, railroads are kind of people.
They are kind of people. Yeah. I mean, the Southern Pacific.
Mitt Romney. How's it going?
The Southern Pacific proved that back in the 1870s.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the battery electric locomotive.
Oh, it's cute.
Yeah, this is maybe the good.
It might have a face that's cute as a button, but down here is a monster. Not here, but down there is a monster.
There's one thing battery electric trains are good at, and that's serving lightly used branch lines where overhead line electrification is not necessarily worth it.
Oh,
right?
To have never done the beaching axe and to have done a bunch of British sort of like little rail cars of these.
Yeah. And one of the best examples is the Deutsches Dundesband Class 150, which were built originally in the mid 1950s. And basically, what these were is it was like a rail car, so it was like kind of standard thing you'd find everywhere, except instead of having like a diesel motor, they had just a ton of lead acid batteries just in the middle of the frame.
Fuck, that rules.
And they had about the equivalent of 520 to 603 kilowatt hours, which to give like a modern equivalent, that's about the equivalent of like 7 Teslas in these things of lead acid batteries.
No, I'm sorry. This just flatly rules. I don't.
Yeah.
And they actually ran these from the 50s until like 1995. And they had a bunch of nicknames. They were called Acublets or Battery Lightning, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the other ones.
So,
But
let me like to take a run at these. Säure Bomber, acid bombers, Steckdosen,
Oh, boy.
Steckdosen Intercity, Taschenlampen Express, a pocket torch express, or this one, Hängebauchschweine, pot-bellied pigs, and
I like it.
felt a bit Hängebauch myself. Bauch, excuse me.
And the reason why they were called pot-belly pigs is later in their life, because the batteries were centered in the center of the chassis, they started to sag because the actual tons of lead acid batteries that are in them. But these are
It's
really
ironic
cool.
because that's a swayback and not a hogback.
This is true.
Yeah.
And these are actually really cool because like on like branch lines that otherwise would have like a DMU, they took over the role on that. The only downside is because of the lead acid batteries and because of batteries having just limited capacity, you could only really run these things on very flat routes, because otherwise if you're going up some hills, you would drastically cut the amount of distance or range you could run these. But otherwise they were really good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which is really nice about trains is they're really good at coasting. You can get up to a good speed and then shut off the throttle and go many, many miles without touching it. But that changes when there's a gradient.
Yes.
And the other thing is, on a train, range is very important, right?
Sure.
Especially not so much on branch lines, but for mainline trains. I'll give you an example. Amtrak runs the California Zephyr, roughly 2,000 miles from Chicago to San Francisco in 51 hours, right? Which is not a great schedule. But on this trip, it refuels once in Omaha, Nebraska. And they don't even strictly have to. It's just a top off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to have a lot of range, especially for passenger trains, but also freight trains that are anything other than short branch line services.
Sure.
So let's look at maybe a more modern example, which I kind of like. This is
also very cute.
Yes, this is a Viva Rail Class 230, right? They took old London Underground D stock from the late 70s and they refurbished them. And they stuck some batteries on there.
Thought I saw a family resemblance there, yeah.
Yes. They already use these on a few branch lines in the UK, but those are diesel versions.
Ugh.
Right? Yeah. Viva Rail has so far built 2 battery versions of it, both 2 car units, to demonstrate the technology. I think both of them caught fire at one point.
I mean...
Yeah.
Oh. What are you going to do?
Well, they've repaired them. These are, I'm not sure if those were the battery ones or the diesel ones, but they've had at least 2 fires on these. They're currently owned by Railroad Development Corporation to demonstrate their pop-up metro concept, right? Which is like, okay, if you're a town or a small city, you have some unused railroad track, hey, we'll come in and build some temporary platforms, and we can see how rail mass transit would work here, which I think that's a fun idea. Yeah. I like it.
Not bad, yeah.
Yeah, so they're housed at the Rock Hill Furnace Trolley Museum right now, and they sort of shuttle back and forth on that track to show off the potential customers, right?
Which is very funny because they have to run on Pennsylvania trolley gauge.
No, Rock Hill Furnace is standard gauge.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay. Maybe I'm thinking of the other one that's like close by or something.
Yeah, no, that is the standard gauge trolley museum. I think it's standard gauge. The one in Washington, Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania trolley gauge.
Oh, okay, that's probably
Um,
what I'm thinking of.
and I think Electric City Trolley Museum is also standard gauge. Or I know it is because it
They
has
have
an
to share
interchange with
tracks, yeah.
yeah. So and these are good for like low intensity routes where you can do it in one charge. They advertise a 10-minute recharge time, right? And that's pretty quick. But for passenger service, that's a completely unacceptable dwell time. Like you can't just sit at a station for 10 minutes and expect people to use the train like that. You could potentially add a bunch of charging infrastructure at every stop and partially recharge, but that's a lot of effort, right?
Yeah, and by that
Um,
point, you're back up to something like electrification anyway, in terms of like
yeah,
capital costs.
that's going to be a big theme coming up. Now, it's not just folks in the UK who have, or folks over in Europe who've thought about this. We got the Long Island Railroad tried to refit some of their multiple unit trains with batteries. Right back in early 2021, they started this project. They were gonna they run on third rail electrification, which they probably shouldn't at this point. It probably,
No.
I think at this point they should just consider wiring up the whole system with overhead lines
But
because of
that's
how
capital
Absolutely.
cost.
that's capital
Oh,
cost.
no.
Yeah, you could get rid of one of those extra power systems that are in Penn Station. That'd probably be a net good. It'd be a lot less complicated to maintain. Anyway, especially with all the grade crossings, all the kids who could get fried by the third rail. So anyway, they were like, okay, we need to electrify our whole system. What if we try it with batteries? Can we just sling batteries onto our existing rail cars? Because right now the trains that go onto, say, for instance, the Oyster Bay branch, they have to switch to diesel at some point, right? So they spent about $850,000 on the project and concluded that actually, no, this won't work. The cars can't take the weight, I think was the reason. And so that's not happening. But I think
you
they
have
are.
a big sort of press event here where they
Yeah.
go look at our futuristic new train.
Yes, our futuristic new train we bought, half a dozen years ago.
Yes, yeah. But it has batteries in it, like your headphones do. It's like basically it's wireless, literally.
I believe this was just a stock. What is this? An M9 that they just dragged out there with a diesel
that's
for
an
the
M7,
the
I
press.
think.
M7. They
Yeah.
brought out the M stands for military. They just dragged it out there with a diesel for the press event.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So refitting these things doesn't always work. I mean, these batteries are heavy. You do need new rolling stock if you want to throw batteries in there, or at least something that's that it's not like simple engineering, right? So that's sort of on the passenger idea of like what I would consider practical, which is okay, you switch the batteries maybe for the end of the line or for branch lines, but folks are trying to take it further to mainline diesel locomotives, convert those to batteries.
Sure, why not?
So this is the Wabtec Flex Drive.
What a name.
I'll let Alan explain this because he wrote
this as you see, it has like 2,400 kilowatt hours of capacity, which again in like Tesla numbers, that's about like 32 Teslas.
Right.
So there's a lot of batteries in this thing.
There's a lot of batteries to the point where they had to interrupt the walkway on the side of the locomotive.
Yeah, it's
although it looks like this door might allow you access through. I don't know.
It's an interesting firefighting challenge if one of these decides to have a bad time.
No, don't think about that. You just
don't worry about that.
You just take a plane full of sand.
Literally
the sand tanker, the sand Hercules.
Yes.
Imagine this thing derails in the Howard Street tunnel.
Oh dear.
You just weld the tunnel together. That's it.
I was about to say you just melt downtown Baltimore.
Yeah.
The sum of all fears.
Macaros, no.
But what essentially this is a Gevo. Basically, it's without the prime mover and just instead just a ton of batteries. And
our listeners who are not into trains, a GEVO is a type of diesel locomotive that's pretty modern.
Yeah, the GEVO is essentially just your bog standard, just diesel freight locomotive that you'd find in the United States. And what this is you rip the diesel engine out of the thing, and instead you just fill it up with batteries. Like it's very dumb energy, but obviously there's a lot of engineering that goes into the battery kind of section of this.
This thing's probably very heavy compared to a GEVO.
I actually don't know. I would be very interested to look that up.
Well, it says 430,000 pounds here, and then presumably I can go to Wikipedia here. GEVO.
But yeah, this thing. So in railroad terms, in yards in the past and still nowadays, oftentimes you'd connect this thing to a diesel locomotive called a slug, and what a slug is it doesn't have a prime mover, meaning it doesn't have a diesel engine, but it connects to the electrical system of the diesel engine that's moving cars around. And what this does is it gives you more electric motors per the diesel engine. So basically, the diesel engine can work super hard at low speeds, but not do a burnout, but instead has more like electric motors to move and more traction to move stuff with. And normally that's only used for really slow speeds, like 5 to 10 miles an hour, just moving like cars around like a yard. And that's usually what slugs are good at. But this is essentially a slug with your electric motors and everything, but it has a ton of batteries. So it can move around using the batteries and stuff like that. But that's not what it's mainly built for. Because like generally you wouldn't just put one of these on a train. You'd also
Uh-oh.
Not good.
Yeah, that's not good.
Fucking Zencaster, man.
Let's
Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Sorry,
Yeah, no
my
worries.
computer
That'll
blue
do it.
screened.
That'll do it.
But yeah,
Where are we on the flex drive?
Yeah, so basically it's a slug.
It's 32 Teslas.
And
Yes.
yeah, 32 Teslas. And when you take two diesel engines and you put one of these in between the two, and you essentially run the thing as a hybrid consist. So basically, like Roz was saying earlier, when you have a diesel engine and you go downhill or you need to brake, you use dynamic brakes, and the thing will just put heat back in the atmosphere. Like you're not recapturing the energy. So the idea with this thing is that when you go down the hill and you use dynamic brakes, all of the energy goes back into the batteries in this thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's not a hybrid, but when you attach it to a diesel, it becomes a hybrid.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yes. And the idea with this thing is that like no capital cost, you just buy the thing and put it into your consist. And it's found that BNSF ran like some test trains with this over the course of like a year, and they found that generally it saved between like 14 to 15% fuel burn on one train's run over like a
That's much better than auto throttle.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a substantial amount. Like it's not like you're throwing computer at the thing. You're actually throwing a physical asset at the problem. But it's still not like a substantial thing like electrification would be. It's just kind of like, hey, yeah, this I guess works.
It's better than nothing, but it's not like it's not revolutionary, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been much touted as like the coming of the battery freight locomotive, but it can't run on its own, or it can for short distances, but this is absolutely not something that's going to pull a long train. You can't attach several of
like honestly, if you wanted to use this thing by itself, it would actually be really good at running like local freight trains, which that's also a problem because the class ones hate local freight. So multiple issues
this is
here.
It's the closest thing to a battery road locomotive ever built. Now, I'm going to cite a few things from a study called Economic, Environmental, and Grid Resilience Benefits of Converting Diesel Trains to Battery Electric. I'll put a link to that in the the description. But this uses a number of figures that I was kind of suspicious of. But you could move an average train, and that's like 4 locomotives and some number of cars. I forget.
A perfectly spherical train.
This perfectly spherical train, an
atmosphere.
average of 241 kilometers, with a boxcar holding 14 megawatt hours of electricity, right? And that would have more for longer runs. You'd couple more boxcars together. Of course, this has 2.4 megawatt hours, so that's not going to get you 241 kilometers. But that's 241 kilometers is a pretty short run for a freight train. I don't know how they got that average, because I thought that was there's some trains that'll go less than that, and there's a lot that will go a lot more than that.
So yeah, but you only need a couple dozen of these things in order to achieve that short run.
This is the thing. Yes, you need a lot. You need a lot of batteries.
Well, it's kind of like the rocket equation, where your rocket is carrying the fuel that is also the fuel you need that you're putting up in the air. So it's like your locomotive is carrying the weight of the batteries, but the batteries are also propelling you. And it's just like, when does it become too ridiculous?
And obviously these batteries they're getting higher energy density, they're getting smaller all the time. The other thing these researchers suggested that, well, if you had a charger rated for 72 megawatts, you could charge 8 of these cars at a time, right?
That's nothing. Like, that comes out of the wall, pretty much, I assume.
72 megawatts is a lot of electricity.
Oh.
The whole Amtrak Northeast...
Big wall, Alice. Big wall.
The whole Amtrak Northeast corridor between Washington, D.C. and New York City averages 63 megawatts. Now that's an average that is taking into account a lot of downtime at night where there's very few trains running, but that's a lot of electricity, right? You are investing into a lot of electrical infrastructure to support these battery trains, right? And you have to build that out to every place where you fuel trains, which, given these things have a limited range, is going to be a lot more.
Hey, maybe we
places.
can have more of those little towns like Thurman that only exist to like charge up these things.
I imagine that it's going to be like staffed by like 2 guys at most. You know, and but
a town of 2 guys.
The thing is, like 241 kilometers is like steam locomotive numbers. It's not very good. And
just come back. We've returned with a V. You know,
town of Dave and Bob.
But for like a really basic comparison, a fuel tank on a SD70, which is a comparable diesel locomotive to this, right? Same basic shape and size. The fuel tank holds 4,900 gallons of diesel, which, back of the envelope calculation, that equivocates to 203 megawatt hours.
God,
right?
Oil's so fucking efficient.
It's really good.
It's disgustingly energy efficient is the thing.
Yes, they're really good energy density. Now, obviously, not all of that is available, right? Because combustion engines aren't that efficient, right? So it's not like you have a full 203 megawatt hours, but you have a lot. You have a lot of fuel in there, and that's why, say, Amtrak can go 3/4 of the way across the country on 1 tank of gas. 1 tank of diesel, excuse me. So yeah, this is pretty limited in the range department on its own. Obviously, when you attach diesel engines to it, it's much better. Now, there is a company trying to do a complete battery electric road locomotive, right? And that is, of course, Progress Rail, right? Progress Rail is sort of the tattered remnants of Electromotive Division.
I see. It's owned by Caterpillar, so
it's owned by Caterpillar now. Yeah,
offset all of the like.
This is something, I guess.
Yeah. So they've come up with a large line of products. Only 1 locomotive has been built, to my knowledge, which is
this is it here.
This is the one. It's the one in the picture here, right? And this was supposed to have completed in-service testing last year, but to my knowledge, it has not started testing.
It's very cool. Like, if you look at the bottom left one, I really enjoy putting the like new product, sort of like clean green livery on the same form factor as a diesel locomotive.
Mm-hmm.
I really like
I
that.
mean, this is not a very good render. I will say that this is
Do
the
trains
white
have
locomotive.
wheels? No, I
White
don't think so.
locomotive on a white background, not very good.
Mm.
Well, they obviously don't have much of a graphic design department.
You could solve this by putting it on a black background. That's all you have to do.
Right.
Impossible.
So anyway, they have several products on offer right now. They have this heavy 8-axle road switcher down here. It needs 8 axles because it's that heavy, right? It also has a pantograph in the back, which is interesting. That's presumably for in-motion charging, which
I don't know if it's even in motion charging. I think it's. I've seen some renders of them. They just pull to a certain section of the yard that just has a rail above the track that's just for charging.
That makes sense.
Again, this is like it's doing so much electrification to avoid doing any electrification.
Electrification,
Yes.
right?
Oh yeah.
So Union Pacific has ordered 20 of their switcher locomotives, which I don't have a render of those up here. BHP, which is a big mining company in Australia, they ordered 2 of these big guys for evaluation on their line. They're big, long Australian iron ore routes. You know, they go from the iron ore mines in Pilbara.
Nowhere to nowhere.
Yeah,
This being Australia,
exactly.
Could be a conveyor belt kind of thing.
Well, it is
Australian railroading derogatory.
A conveyor belt system. What I'm slightly confused about is it does not seem to have the range to make it to the end of the line without recharging, which is not the case with their big diesels they got now. And this is where you sort of you got to look at these things as for the purpose of railroad operations, these are just diesel locomotives with less range and less emissions. But they don't offer any of the performance upgrades that overhead wire would get you, except maybe you could do short-term overload on the traction motors, which railroads don't even want that because they want to run everything as slowly and cheaply as possible.
Of course.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
So these things are.
Shut up.
This is what's on offer from Progress Rail. Again, I don't think any have been built except one prototype, and they're trying to fire up their new factory in Fort Worth, Texas, the new non-union one. They got a second new non-union factory in Brazil. More outsourcing there.
Great.
So, very good in
build
places,
the shit that no one needs and which doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Lula will fix that. I don't know.
We can always hope.
Brazil is a whole nother story of they had a big electric rail network in Torreão.
Brazil definitely a very fragmented rail network for how wealthy the country is. I will say that.
They used to have a whole, just like Mexico, they used to have a whole nationalized rail network, and it was all electrified. And then they didn't keep up. They didn't do the upkeep, and then the government eventually neoliberalized and privatized. Blah blah blah. The story, yeah.
I hate when this happens.
But these guys, battery capacity on the big guy here, 14.5 megawatt hours, which is not super great. It's not good for like the long hauls it seems to be expected to do. I don't know what the deal is here. I don't know why BHP is interested, other than maybe they're trying to show to the investors, hey, we're a green iron ore mining company.
They are a mining company,
Yeah.
It's kind of worth eating that cost to try and greenwash a bit, maybe.
Yeah, we have these 2 locomotives on a siding that we use like once a month when the investors come out to see the mines.
Yeah.
Not to be outdone, Amtrak's getting in on it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Amtrak, this was found in a document a while ago, and like we know that Amtrak is buying new passenger train sets from Siemens because they've already started working with them for some of their long distance locomotives and their Genesis replacements, which are they're replacing their locomotives from the 90s, which is good. But the issue with these are that these train sets that they're getting are based off of the night jet, the OBB, the Austrian night jets in Europe, and those are very good trains. The issue is that Amtrak, unlike the night jets, which are totally electric overhead wire based, Amtrak wants flexibility, and with
these are totally overhead electric wire cringe.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and with flexibility comes compromise, and the compromise here is that instead of having an electric locomotive, you have a diesel locomotive
Things are
hybrid,
worse.
which it can run on overhead wire when it's under wire, but then it has a diesel locomotive that pulls it when you're not on the corridor or wherever that's electrified. But the super cringe moment comes from the fact that they need to run so a decent amount of Amtrak services run out of Penn Station, and specifically out of Penn Station, they don't go on the corridor. They actually go up the old New York Central's West Side connection or line from Penn Station all the way to the connection on the Metro North connection along the Hudson River. So, and that's there's about 10-mile section of track that goes from down like Midtown Manhattan to the top of Manhattan to connect with the Hudson line. And there is some third rail in there that comes out of Penn Station, and the current Genesis locomotives from the 90s have a little third rail pickup on them that just allows it to get out of Penn Station without just filling Penn Station with
Sometimes they don't bother turning off the diesel engine, though.
Right.
Yep. I've seen that.
Those.
And so Amtrak's solution to this is, instead of extending the third rail or even doing overhead wire for the short 10 miles from Penn Station to the connection on the Hudson, they're going to put a battery tender on these Empire.
Yeah.
They're going to put a battery tender on these Empire Corridor trains or any of the medium to short distance trains that run on this corridor. So that would include the Empire Corridor, the Ethan Allen, the I think it's the Adirondack, and maybe the Maple Leaf, which are all like medium to short distance trains that run out of this section.
What are they using for the Lakeshore Limited?
They probably will use some mixture. I don't know, because they still have to I don't know. They're probably gonna use the Genesis until they like crumble.
They fall apart like the Blues Brothers car when they pull into Penn Station.
Yeah, basically. And like it's just frustrating because you can easily electrify that section, and I guarantee, like, again, Metro North, similar to Long Island Railroad, use third rail, and it's one of those things like LIRR where eventually they're gonna need to put up wires.
I think that's it's definitely like you start looking at like how, because like the whole idea of this is you can avoid the locomotive changes that are currently a problem on the Northeast Corridor, because you have the locomotive's diesel, but there's a pantograph on the second car, right? An extra powered axle. But these are these are sort of kludges. Like fundamentally, it's a kludge. Especially since so much of this right of way that Amtrak is now running trains on has become state owned. Like the stuff that's off the corridor, it would make sense. Now you have control over the track. Just put the wires up, as opposed to, assuming that we're going to have this future of diesel traction.
That would require Amtrak to recognize and then seize an opportunity.
This is
capital
true.
Costs, never.
This is true. I mean, you're looking at, and I mean all the way down to Richmond. That's state-owned track now.
So the 3 corridors that Amtrak could electrify tomorrow if they wanted or applied for the grants are the DC to Richmond corridor, which is the Virginia one. They could do the Empire Corridor, which is the basically Poughkeepsie to Schenectady, which is like your upstate New York stuff.
I thought that was owned by CSX.
Nope, that's owned by Amtrak. It's just CSX has rights to run freight trains if they want. And then the last one is the New Haven to Springfield, Massachusetts corridor, which is entirely
And-
How's
owned
that
by
not fucking
Amtrak.
electrified already?
They run a lot of trains on that corridor too.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, and they Condot also runs their own
Right.
trains from Hartford to New
Right.
Haven too on that.
But
So they could do it tomorrow if
the
they
theory
really
with the
wanted
battery
to.
tender here is this entire section at the front of the car that's going to be one huge battery. Rest of it's a passenger car, right? And then that battery is there to get you the first 2,000 feet out of Penn Station.
That's so goddamn.
And then
wasteful.
it also is it's supposed to be able to provide a little bit of extra oomph while accelerating as well, because you're going to regenerate, electricity from the
Like
brakes.
theoretically, theoretically you can use it similar to that Wabtec locomotive, where like on braking, your dynamic brakes will it's essentially like a Prius. Sure. You'll generate some energy when you slow down. So it's not a terrible idea. It's just that it's kind of stupid.
What if we just did stuff better? So we go from a not a great idea to a much worse idea. So this is.
Oh, it's bad. Like from the Nazi superweapons episode, it's bad when you get to something that only exists in drawing form.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, Metra they're notorious for having a lot of interesting and dumb ideas that only would come from them.
Yes. So Metra is the Chicago commuter rail system, and they are, I think, one of the most backwards of the big commuter rail systems, and that's saying something, right?
Yeah.
Really, they're a symbol of everything wrong with American passenger railroads. You have lots and lots of trains running not very many services. You have really bad equipment utilization. You have, they got like 1 million stations in Chicago, giant terminals, and they can, they're still running old.
Fuck all with them.
Yeah, old timey
consolidation.
Yeah, they're doing old timey commuter service where one train makes one run, maybe 2 runs a day. You have one crew to do that. It's very, very expensive to provide not that much service, right? Anyway, they want to electrify. They're like, we are going to be the future. And what they did was, rather than go to a manufacturer and try and order, well, ideally you'd put up wires, right? They don't want to do that. They're the future of railroading here at Metra by perpetuating a frankly antiquated and racist mode of commuter rail service. Yeah, the premium service for white people is basically what it is. They issue an RFP and said, we're offering a challenge to manufacturers. Take 4 of our old F40 PHs. That's the classic Amtrak locomotive, but they also had a bunch, and repower these with batteries, right? And the big part of this is that they have an entirely EMD fleet, despite EMD no longer existing, and they want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're just going to retrofit and retrofit.
Yeah.
It gets so much better.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Beyond this battery locomotive, there is no more EMD locomotives being produced, especially passenger ones. And the newer passenger ones that were produced weren't that good.
You mentioned
F125s.
this is under CAT's ownership.
Yeah,
the F125s, they weren't that good. They had a lot of issues. The only people that bought them was Metrolink in LA. So what Metra is doing besides these battery locomotives is they're taking an SD70 Mac, which is a freight locomotive for long distance freight, and they're converting it into a passenger locomotive.
It's a very bad idea. It's not going to work very well.
Yeah. The most hilarious thing about that, though, is the SD70 Mac will be the only locomotive that they will have that has AC traction motors.
Oh my god!
I love how they're just sort of experimenting. They're just fucking around because nobody's buying or selling new locomotives anymore. Apparently.
Exactly. It's.
Well,
I run a railroad based on vibes.
Yeah.
Oh no, Metra is like the ultimate example of what if you gave some like backwards ass foamers a railroad to run.
What is
like,
a
that's
foamer?
Metra.
That feels like a slur
A
I'm
rail,
not
like
party to.
it's a rail fan, but like the really
The
bad
really
kind.
bad kind, yeah. It is a slur.
Roz, basically. Or friend of the show, Jay, if you're listening.
Yeah.
I'll go by the term once in a while. So yeah,
you're reclaiming it.
You're reclaiming it. Yeah.
Friend of the show and mascot, Jeremy Zorik.
Yeah. So we
love you, Zorik.
They sent out this RFP to convert 4 of their oldest locomotives into new modern battery locomotives. I believe they sent it specifically to a couple firms, and none of them responded, except of course Progress Rail, who are like, yeah,
pick us.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Hey.
Yeah, we'll fucking do it. They got one
Caterpillar, just like, please, we need some money out of this.
We need to get a little bit of money out of our
Shouldn't have
gamble.
closed the plant in York, you motherfuckers.
I was reading like an article that apparently like they reached out to Alstom to try to do this, and Alstom just like sent a polite letter that basically said like, you can't
do
be
not
fucking
do this.
serious.
Do not do
Please
this.
no, do not do this.
So now there's a lot of obvious problems with taking the oldest locomotive you have and trying to make it the most modern one, right? But
yeah, Singer can do this with Porsches. You can't do this with locomotives.
I would say this might be a good fit for Metra because they have such terrible equipment utilization. You know, this thing's going to...
Oh, because it's a railroad run by lunatics.
Yeah,
sure.
this thing's going to sit in the yard at the end of the Rock Island line. It's going to charge there. And then it's going to make one run
Sorry, did you say Cock Island?
No, I said Rock Island.
Did you say Big Thick Cock Island?
No, I did not.
Okay, I know.
This is the point in the recording where derangement begins to set in.
I just wanted to be gross. I honestly just wanted to be gross.
In many ways, when we do a podcast that goes over 2 hours, and specifically over 2.5 hours, it becomes, in a very literal sense, the audio log found next to like a bloody handprint on the wall.
You guys remember Alien or like Dead Space? This is basically what's happening in real time.
It's the audio log found by the skeleton sitting on the toilet in Fallout.
So anyway, what this locomotive is going to wind up being used for?
Roz perseveres bravely ahead, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen comrades.
It's going to sit in the yard and charge overnight at the end of the Rock Island line. And then they're going to use it for one run in the morning. And it's going to sit in the station in Chicago for the whole day and charge. And then they're going to use it for one run in the evening, because that's how bad Metra is with equipment utilization.
That is pathetic.
It's really bad. It's a terrible way to run a railroad. And they're committed to continuing to run it that badly. So that's a lot of time for charging, though. Maybe the battery locomotive will work out for them. I don't know.
Maybe.
You know, paying a crew a whole day's pay for 2.5 hours work. And then we get into weird stuff.
Oh, this wasn't the weird stuff. Oh, that's pretty weird.
No.
This is pretty fucking weird.
This is pretty fucking weird. So,
Intramotive.
Intramotive, yeah.
I like this idea of this sort of just rogue Bear's car.
Yeah. Actually,
I've yelled about one of these in one of my videos. Yeah, there's always been this sort of an attempt to take your like intermodal type vehicles of some sort, so you're like container carrying vehicles, and make something weird that carries containers. This doesn't have to apply necessarily to the battery vehicles that are here. Like in Germany and in Japan, there's been attempts to make these like either EMUs, so like they're sort of like containers sitting on like flat cars, and they have like pantographs where it's just like where it's just like this weird EMU train that just has containers on it. There's been attempts at that. There's been attempts at making like weird like attempts at kind of like hybrid consists where you have like these diesel powered things that just like only carry like a few containers. People love containers. People love doing stupid shit with containers. It's a universal
It's a fun
thing.
little box that brings you your crap.
Yes. It's the present I unwrap, but instead of unwrapping, it's the door creaks open. I don't my containers trigger me though, because I worked at this one warehouse like over a summer once, and it was and this is like back in like just out of high school. It was one of those jobs where, hey, I need money, this pays decently, dumb idea. And it was a party supply warehouse, and it was one of those weird ones
As
where
opposed to all
instead
the
of just being
normal
like
party supply warehouses.
yeah, like this was an industrial party supply warehouse. The difference being like this is the one where like say you had like a wedding out in the middle of a field, it's construct that giant canvas tent like out in the field. This is the warehouse that would send you the poles and the tent canvas, et cetera, et cetera. And like they had shipping containers outside of the warehouse that they stored a lot of the poles in. And oh my god, we would have to go in these shipping containers with these long ass steel and aluminum poles that banged around on each other inside of a steel container. Oh my god. I can still hear the ringing from that just insane reverberation inside of these containers.
Hey, but what
Not
if
a
one
fun
of
job.
those was just attached to a couple of autonomous vehicles and was just, moving around the railroad system on its own sort of imperative?
So this is
So true.
parallel systems concept for an autonomous container moving system, right? You see, they built a prototype
What
here.
if all of the advantages of a train? What if we just took those and we,
And-
like a used car battery, threw them in the ocean?
Yes.
The
Yes.
eels are rebelling.
This is the perfect metaphor for the thing that we were talking about earlier with electric cars, of making a thing that is only useful when it's done in a collectivist way, because that's how the technology works, into an individualist thing, into an autonomous thing, in a way that actively hinders it.
Yes. So
well, we're gonna throw the beep boop machine at the problem, and it's gonna fix it.
Basic idea of parallel systems is we're gonna do last mile container delivery by rail, right? So this would essentially, you'd have a big intermodal terminal, right, where containers would be unloaded from trains or ships or whatever, and then you could load those individual containers onto these sets of bogies here. They are autonomous, which I don't know how that works on a railroad. I know how automatic railroads work. I don't think you can do an autonomous railroad.
You put it on the computer.
Embrace the future, you fucking dweeb.
You put it on the computer, and the AI will decide what gets priority.
There's already...
if you don't put the word autonomous in the name, how will I scam the investors?
Already centralized dispatching. You don't need to make it autonomous because you still have to give it orders.
No, the AI will
impossible.
Do that. Yeah.
I think my main
like a
issue
robot
with a lot of these
hanging
projects
off the side, ready to catch paper orders from like a guy on the side of the tracks. Another robot, actually.
Exactly. I think my main problem with a lot of these projects is that the people that come up with these often are assuming an idealized world where all the rail infrastructure is just like, I can just use it. Like, there's no consequences to me using rails. Like, I don't have to think about who owns this.
Who owns it. You don't have to think about like rules about like reciprocal switching or something like that. You don't have to worry about regulations or deregulations or what.
Grade crossings.
So,
what's that?
The idea is this is last mile delivery. This would go to like a small container terminal and then be loaded onto a truck from there. But it's very strange. It was developed by a couple SpaceX guys.
Of course. Yeah.
It's supposed to have virtual couplers, so you can run a bunch of these together, but why not just actually have
just
couplers?
Platooning, but for a train. But like, why?
I hate this place.
They already do that.
Yeah, they do.
Another issue is that you couldn't, for all of this, you still couldn't directly deliver to a customer.
No,
because boxcars have doors on the side.
Yeah, this has doors on the end.
This
Unless
has
you want
doors
to go open one end of the train and like go all the way down through to get all of your crap. This has to go to a container terminal.
Yeah, exactly. And
as yet, we have been unable to fully automate.
Yeah, doors on the end. That's very convenient for trucks, but for trains, it's just not that efficient compared
Oh,
to
right,
like
right.
spotting a whole bunch of boxcars next to a building. You can do that very easily in one move. But if you try and do it on the end, that means you're going down and up a whole bunch of switches. It's just not efficient. There's no reason to do it that way. It takes up a lot of space. So you're kind of you're really taking this and removing a lot of the efficiencies that even individual boxcars have compared to containers. I don't really see a purpose in this, like at all. It just seems like it's trying to make a container do something that a container really can't do, and trying to make a train do something that a train really can't do. And we added AI on top, which means, of course, it's God's own creation and perfect. And angels are sounding trumpets as this thing
amazed
comes
it's
down the
not
tracks.
on the blockchain. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, atrocious.
Yeah.
What's
So
this
the other
other
one
thing?
is intramotive, autonomous rail.
And this
So-
again is like make it into a little
Oh.
car.
Yeah, this is something which I really don't understand how it works, and their website is very flashy and has no information.
It's incomprehensible,
Yeah.
dude.
But what I understand here, what I've guessed, is you have this large battery pack, and it fits on the front of a railroad car, right? And then
How?
somehow, yeah, that's my question
Adapters,
too.
Alice.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some kind of adapter, but I believe this is designed to
Yeah.
use existing
This
railroad cars.
this is easy. This runs on USB 3 to eSATA.
There's actually
peasy.
a printer cable back there.
Someone finally uses eSATA. We did it.
Once you toss this big battery pack on the front of the rail car, it can drive the rail car to its destination, regardless
Okay.
of the rail car, which is, I assume, why they showed it covered in graffiti. So-
but a locomotive can do that, and in fact, a
Uh,
locomotive can do that with a bunch of different cars at once.
Okay, but imagine
Yeah, but it's not the
this.
future, Alice. Shut up.
Imagine this. What if you have 6 cars for 6 different customers?
Okay,
Then all you need
I like
all you
this.
need
I like this
6 of these.
as a last mile replacement for trucks. Your actual train brings your like stack of 150
Oh, and they sort of go out from like the mother
yeah,
station.
exactly. No,
basically.
no more roads, only rails. And you better look where you're going, otherwise you'll be
Yes.
mown down by one of these because these now comprise all street traffic.
Yeah. So imagine you have 6 different customers. They need 6
Coming
different
from
cars.
some sort of shipping terminal like
All-
in South Philly, that might actually be useful.
All you need are 6 of these big battery packs, which power these wheels through some way which I don't understand, and then they can all be autonomously driven to their destinations. Now, let's think about this in actual railroad terms. There's a big industrial park near Northeast Philly Airport, which might need this kind of 6 different cars for 6 different people. But in order to get those cars up the Bridesburg industrial branch there, these cars would have to
Hi,
travel
Megan.
across 4 tracks of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor.
Yes.
And they would have to dodge 130-mile-an-hour trains.
Yes, yes,
2
yes,
trains
yes,
enter.
yes.
1 train leaves. Don't sell this to me like it's a negative.
It's when the robot pod decides, I will get in front of other
The
train
way you
today."
do that now, the way you do that now is Conrail brings the cars to the junction, and then the dispatcher tells them, "All right, you're clear to go across all the main line." They go across all the main line. Everything goes as a unit, and then they drop off the cars one by one at the industry. Here, it's like the idea is you sort of send these cars off as they're loaded, which means they arrive at completely unpredictable times at the
Oh, that sounds
interlocking,
fine.
Great.
and that means
You're a coward.
what are they going to do? Are they going to try and squeeze the cars in between each passenger train? Or are they going to or they just hold them all until the scheduled time when they can all go
Maybe they hold
across
them
at
till-
once?
Like,
Maybe
uh,
they hold them until there's 5 or so ready. Then they're a train and they go across the train tracks. What's so hard about
What?
this? You're being
Playing a game of
you're being difficult for
Playing
no
a
reason
game-
to my robot train boys.
This is
playing a game of Frogger, except the frog is a 4-ton container.
I feel like these are missing like fundamental realities of how railroads operate. Like you can't you talk about like completely revolutionizing rail transport. Number one, this is a very revolution resistant industry. Number two, there's no way
Oh yeah.
there's no way to gradually phase in a system like this outside of maybe some very niche markets. If this is anywhere near a main line, it's unusable.
I'm just amazed that the parallel systems one got past the renderite phase. Like, I'm amazed that they actually made a prototype.
And I'm going to be honest, containers, not really like the primary form of moving stuff outside of like long distance stuff like that. A lot of places will get like 53-foot dry van trailers on a truck. You know, you get something like that. Containers are not a lot of distribution centers get like containers. They tend to be limited towards port areas or near like whatchamacallit, big inland ports. Otherwise, everyone likes dry vans better.
Well, even the crazy technology called boxcars.
So this is kind of missing the point. This is a solution in search of a problem.
Sure.
But it does use batteries and it is autonomous, which
it's cool. It's the future. It's the way of the future.
Yeah, there's still a dispatcher, and I hope they I hope they can figure out how to get it to respond to orders over radio.
Speaking of future.
So, but people want this to happen anyway.
Of course.
The politicians have gotten in on this, which is fun because battery electric vehicles are the future, period. Right? You got to do it. You have, I talked about the government abdicating planning before, but there is an extent to which the government decided, we'll do some planning, but in the most minimal and worst sense possible. So, for instance, Charlie Baker, governor of Massachusetts, has not been
Go Bruins.
Most intelligent man.
Oh, yeah.
Not a very not.
Hey, you want to get to work? Kill yourself.
Accurate. Hey, he's
not wrong. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not wrong.
I was about to say. I mean, the way the MBTA has been pretty recently, a good chance you might die on it.
We've had a lot of MBTA episode requests.
We finally got Charlie off the MBTA by killing him.
We got him off the MBTA and into the State House.
Yeah. No, Charlie got off the MTA because they shut down the Orange Line. They kicked him off at Scully Square.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it's linked to road projects, unfortunately. So,
but Charlie Baker recently put in a funding authorization bill for the T, right, which was planning on modernizing a bunch of its commuter lines with electric locomotives. He put a specific line in the funding bill that they would not be purchasing electric locomotives, but battery electric locomotives, right? And this has screwed up a good amount, a pretty long planning process.
But I see something here. If you look at the picture, there's a little triangle off that big pole.
There's a little triangle,
it's got the wires.
It's the wires are already there.
They're already there.
They're already there.
Yeah, on MBTA's Providence line and most of their other lines that branch out into the southern portion, they run on the Northeast Corridor, so it's like
there's already electric. There's already electric.
You don't even have the capital costs, and you still don't want to make them.
Yeah, and the MBTA was like pretty. They were looking like they were getting pretty gung ho about like, okay, we're gonna put up at least a decent amount of wires. They were still like, well, we'll run battery services on the. Unlike the outside of the routes, but like core service would all be electric. Right now, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, they might be able to skirt around it by saying, well, these have the capability of drawing from overhead lines as well as running on batteries. But this is I don't know. It's pretty. It's an unnecessary curtailment of being able to use existing technology. Technology that's real and works. Because
the only thing we can do is the impossible. Is something I always say on Trash Future. It's like, this is the only sort of thing that our political settlement makes allowances for, is we can only do shit that doesn't work.
Yeah, and the only way you would be able to like do battery electric trains, in a way that makes sense there would be electric multiple units of some kind. Right, because they'd be lighter, they'd be able to make the runs. But that would require replacing all of the MBTA's fleet, which is expensive. And that is it's just a bad decision and an expensive one. And here we are. Because I don't know if you could do like a again. We've seen that there are no battery electric locomotives in existence yet. There is one battery electric slug, but there's nothing that's like a road locomotive.
Yeah.
And this is what MBTA is expected to procure at this point.
It's committed to it in the same way that so much road infrastructure is committed to self-driving.
Yeah. So yeah, they want them to buy things that don't exist. Another one was there's a bunch of
it's just fucking gadget puns, dude. I honestly don't understand it.
There's a bunch of politicians in Los Angeles, mostly in Los Angeles.
Boo.
They sent a letter to Pete Buttigieg.
Fuck you, Noah.
Yeah.
They sent a letter to Pete Buttigieg being
California.
like, please stop texting me.
Yeah.
Ambiguous sort of like phrases.
Well, they
California derogatory.
They sent,
burn that state to the ground. They'll do it anyway by themselves.
But. Yeah, that's already been happening for a while. They asked him to get California high-speed rail to ditch funding for overhead line because by the time it would be finished, batteries would make overhead lines obsolete.
Bro, I swear the technology just needs a bit more investment. It's not there yet, but any day now.
Any day
promise,
there, yeah.
Bro.
Just one more round of funding.
And then
please, God, just give me another $785 million and I'll do it. I swear I'll do it. It won't just go up my nose.
And then they would.
Why spend money on capital when I can spend twice the amount of money on research?
The other thing they wanted to do was have that money diverted to transit projects in the LA area. Right. Now, this did not happen.
Thank God.
Right. But also
because of Dark Pete.
People are really.
Buttigieg has activated the laser eyes. He's like,
wait, Dark Pete. You mean Obama?
That feels. Is that racist? I can't tell.
I am.
Well, Pete talks like Obama.
Oh God,
like,
he does.
Like, true, he does,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, you've talked me out of this being racist now. Fine, I'm on board.
I don't know. You have to consult Chris.
Yeah. It's fine. And anyone who's listened this far in is not going to be that exercised about whether or not we're cancelled.
Yeah.
You don't make this kind of commitment idly.
But like, people are really into this battery stuff. Like, it's supposed to be complete magic, right? This is the future, and the old ways are dying. And it's just not the case. I mean, if you look,
it's not innovation, but like I think there's this tendency. We talked about this a million times, especially in the United States. It feels like for these sort of what you talked about, back in Franklin, AM, FM.
Yeah.
We talk about these sort of gadget bonds or hyperlink or this or that or whatever it's called. I don't care.
Hypertext transfer protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dude, I'm tired and I'm hungry.
We're all tired. We're all hungry.
Well, I think we talk about but it's important. I think one of the things too is that this is used to sort of innovation as a weapon, basically.
Yes.
Where it's or not, maybe not as a weapon, but certainly as a cudgel.
Yes.
And you see these things certainly, and I think you see these in cities all the time. We see it in Philly, where there's we're not talking about buses even, but we got battery buses and none of them are fucking in service. Why? Because the frames all cracked.
Yeah.
All of them.
Gadget bonds are the star citizen of transportation.
Yeah, and you should be wary when people post some Tahir and Sot shit and are just like, oh, this flying bus is gonna change how we think about. No, it's not. No, it's fucking not. The best autonomous vehicle driving program right now is GM Super Cruise, and they have to manually program the roads into the program by hand. They have to go on their little scanning cars and scan the road. Like that's innovation, not even for innovation's sake, but innovation just as a selling point.
Just to avoid doing anything practical.
Well, is it better? No, it's not. Right. But like there's this idea that new means better, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. Give me my fucking headphone jack back.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes.
Oh well, it's more waterproof. Suck a dick.
To paraphrase a show that I forgot the name of, Sometimes things that are new are worse.
You're paraphrasing The Marvelous Life of Caleb Gallo there.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
Wow!
We don't disrespect Freckle on this show.
Yeah. So the
Your media knowledge is beyond my comprehension, Alice.
I'll send you that video because it's great.
It's a good one, yeah. So the people are getting way into this battery stuff, even though it's not very good. It is not international standards. It is not something that anywhere else is considering on the scale that it's being considered in the United States. Like for mainline service, everywhere that has good functional railroads, battery technology outside of branch lines is a joke. It's not real. Hydrogen trains too, but that's another situation.
The lesson here, as always, is go nuclear.
Yeah, there's a fundamental physics problem at the end of the day. The physics issue with batteries versus overhead line electrification, right? Which is the train that carries its fuel with it is always going to be inferior to one which does not carry fuel with it, just from a performance standpoint, right? It's lighter, it has infinite range, it has fewer things on it to go wrong. A high-speed rail or high-density rapid transit service would be impossible with battery systems right now because it'd be too heavy and the performance would be too bad. If you gotta start.
Batteries weigh shit.
Yeah,
yes.
Batteries are heavy.
Yeah.
Batteries, they
very dense and heavy.
And then when
we're not even talking about firefighting efforts.
No.
Like a giant cargo, freight train on fire full of batteries and other combustibles is not a thing you want to think about.
And they're consumable.
Or a subway train.
They're a consumable part. The
Yeah.
charge on them will run down over time. And at that point, you have to take them all out of the train, throw them in the ocean, build a bunch of new batteries and put them in.
Essentially a new locomotive, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's ridiculous and it's wasteful, and these people just simply don't give a shit because they're so enamored with the idea that everything can just be batteries and everything has to be the most convenient it can possibly be. And I'll say this as someone who owns $400 headphones that are battery based. I'm a fucking idiot. Don't do that.
I think a large portion of this just comes from the fact that people relate to the things that they use most often.
I think that's absolutely true.
And
who doesn't understand a battery,
Yeah, pretty much. And it's not only your phone and all the stuff, all the tech gadget wisdom jigs that people buy nowadays, it's also the fact that in the United States, just a lot of this train infrastructure just doesn't exist here for a lot of people. Yeah. So they don't understand that hey, we can do this in other parts of the US. It's not impossible, but instead they just default to be well, my car runs on a battery. I guess the locomotive should too. Yeah. It's just the small brain thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it is I've had this thought, and I know we're just sort of riffing at this point, but I always got mad at people who treated computers like they were appliances. That and I think a lot of people think of their car and think of a train basically as just a giant appliance.
Sure. Especially these new ones, they look like a fucking fridge or whatever.
Right. Why should I have to ever consider why I look at it? And I think there's also, besides those of us who are really into trains, the average person why wouldn't you fly?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm talking moron takes. But I always get a laugh out of Alan and Roz. You may do this too. We talked about this on the train, but people who book trains during the Amtrak Thanksgiving rush that have MARTA equipment, not MARTA, Mark equipment, and shit like that, and are at NJT equipment, and are how come I was promised Wi-Fi? How come it doesn't have Wi-Fi? Fuck you, Amtrak. And it's well, because you didn't look at your ticket.
It's also read. Because
but you didn't know what to look for.
Yeah.
My least favorite Twitter post of all time is always the person that posts the DC to New York City Amtrak ticket versus plane ticket, and they're policy failure because it's the day of Amtrak ticket that's really expensive. And I'm oh my fucking god. And it's yeah, they're right in some way, but at the same time it's also there's so many levels of things that you should talk about first.
I feel a large.
I think the answer is clear. We demolish New York, all of it. We keep Grand Central and we keep Penn Station. We rebuild Penn Station brick by brick, of course. I'll go full return on this shit. Rest of it leveled. You can move to Albany for all I fucking care. Leave it. It's just a train depot now.
The most efficient form of logistics is a train running off overhead line electrification, and the electrification is supplied by a nuclear power plant.
Yes.
Welcome to the Northeast
welcome
Corridor.
Welcome to Philly. Northeast Corridor is mostly hydro.
Oh, right, because that's right. You're right.
We build a shitload of those. We attempt to make them as climate proof as possible, which probably will involve some really weird ways of cooling nuclear plants in the future.
Yeah.
But that is a surmountable engineering challenge. We do all of that. Ideally, we transition to a form of economy where you buy fewer sex asses that travel less distance to get to you, and it's going to be fine. That's the solution.
Find a locally made Amish sex arse
union
from the from the farmers market.
Yeah, either you buy fewer sex asses, or you buy sex asses that are produced more sustainably, or are delivered to you in a more collaborative and more consensual fashion, or I don't know. That's the solution. That's where we want to get to. Everyone knows it, and everyone is trying to sell you something and distract you and keep you off of that one shit that everyone knows that we need to do by being check out this cool new shit that doesn't fucking work. Yes. In the podcast.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, freight locomotives. There might be a
little.
little.
The last slide.
I know. I'm trying to.
Maybe there's a little bit of a case for batteries and freight locomotives, just because batteries are heavy and freight locomotives need to be heavy.
It doesn't matter. And
right?
There's a case for lead weights in fucking freight locomotives.
Yeah, some of them have big concrete blocks in them, actually. Cool. Especially slugs.
The only use for batteries I can see in railroading, a serious use, is so when you do have electrification of trains with the good kind, with the wire. Generally, when you do regenerative braking and you put power back into the wires, sometimes there's not anything that's using the section of wire that you're currently on that that could use that power to accelerate. So basically, all you're doing is you're raising the voltage of the wire when you regenerative the power back into it. And that's obviously kind of wasteful, because when you raise the voltage, all you're doing is just making basically just a bigger resistive grid, just miles and miles long. So the best use of batteries is to put them in a shed next to the electrified section, and just when you regen brake on the train, the excess higher voltage goes back into these batteries. And later, if there's another train that's accelerating, the grid can adjust and the batteries can feed back into the line instead of you getting your power from somewhere else.
Yes.
It's
that's so down on the list, I feel like.
SEPTA's already done a big project to add those kinds of batteries.
Didn't London have a prototype bus that had a KERS system?
I don't remember. My brain is mush.
SEPTA.
Essentially, this is like a KERS system, except the KERS system is not located on the vehicle.
No, I understand. I understand.
SEPTA did a big project to bring those kinds of batteries to the Market Frankfurt line, and I believe that worked out pretty good, but I am not sure. But it sounds like it would work out pretty good. I regret to
inform you that I have to leave.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well,
have fun with dinner.
Thank you. I will mute myself.
Okay.
Thank you, listeners.
Have
a good night.
Good night.
All right.
I guess my final conclusion here is sort of, we're going down this battery road. And we talked a lot about the dysfunction of American railroads. And again, I focus on American railroads because they are some of the most dysfunctional in the world. I mean, we are sold this idea that American railroads are the greatest in the world constantly. And it's all propaganda.
I constantly tell people are like, don't we have the most efficient freight network? I'm like, no, you've been gaslit. You've been gaslit, girl. No.
Hey, hell, look at this. I mean, look at this Indian Railways train right here on the screen in front of you. It's gigantic. It's electric powered. They got double stacks.
I love the pantograph.
Oh my God, it's so tall.
I love.
And of course, China has all those high-speed trains, but if you're looking purely in terms of freight, you see a lot of statistics that sound impressive, but actually you start looking into the details and it's like, Jesus Christ, how do they get any trains out at all?
Yeah,
Well, it's
But
people gaslight us into thinking this because the railroads make money, and that's the only thing that
and
matters. Is that
yeah,
yeah,
and if you're electrifying a railroad purely for reasons of environment, and you don't want to change anything about how they operate poorly, maybe you could use batteries, and you could still have really shitty railroads at the end of the day. Right. But if you want
yeah.
something, a modern, effective railroad system that serves more customers, actually benefits the environment, has better working conditions for workers, has schedules, has good passenger trains, has all the nice things that other countries have. And you can do that without reducing freight volumes, probably increasing them even. You have
You're basically talking about
Yeah, I'm
Switzerland.
talking about
Yeah.
Switzerland. And Switzerland doesn't have battery trains. They're increasing overhead line electrification. That's always going to be the superior technology. And you have to develop a mindset where you invest in infrastructure rather than investing in fancier vehicles, because we're looking at a situation.
Capital costs.
We're looking at a situation where we're going to have, these billion-dollar locomotives on 10-mile-an-hour track. I mean, this is this whole thing. There's just a disconnect here that needs to be fixed. And overhead line electrification on some of America's densest rail lines, busiest rail lines, is an obvious thing to do. Some of these freight train lines, they get like 60, 70 trains a day. Maybe you want to centralize the power distribution there. I don't know. But we're so far behind that we're considering crazy technology. It's desperation is what it is. It's not.
I think, yeah. I think my favorite thing is that, if we do keep the current system and do not change it whatsoever, but force these companies to electrify, I guarantee they will just take the current GEVOs and SD70s and just slap pantographs on them.
That's fine. That would be cool.
Yeah.
It'd actually be not as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
it would kind of be cool, honestly. Yeah.
All right. Well, what did we learn?
Nothing.
Nothing.
No.
No, nothing has been learned.
Battery frustrating.
Battery bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Battery okay under
battery
certain very fine
sometimes
circumstances. Otherwise bad.
Yeah, it's just all right. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. It's a bad idea. Safety third.
Safety third.
Safety third.
Shake hands with danger.
Hello, Justin, Alice, yay, Liam.
No,
and possible
Liam ducked
guest.
out early.
Oh, Liam ducked out, yeah.
Liam wasn't tough enough for a 3-hour podcast episode.
I was about to say, maybe we can come in under the wire. I don't know.
Mm.
My story comes to you today from the world of sailing.
Nice.
There have been several times.
Oh, I do that.
There have been several times over the years I've shaken hands with danger that I thought about sharing with you all, from nearly drowning in a capsize, my bosun's chair harness coming undone while 50 feet up a mast, or almost getting electrocuted on a yacht in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Man, sometimes I don't like getting a train too far from my apartment because I'm like, what if I get sick and I need to go home? This is why I would not be in the middle of the Atlantic.
Yes. Well, maybe you could have a big ship with a doctor on it. Have you considered that?
Yeah, that's the thing. I need to be subscribe to the Patreon so I can get rich enough so I can have a private medical staff, like the president.
Personal physician who follows you around.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You get your own battleship. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Since this is a podcast with slides, however, I figured a story with a photo would be most appropriate. My tale relates specifically to the Texas amateur big boat racing circuit, where wealthy oil men, lawyers.
It's good.
This is the only regatta that has the guy who arranged for JFK's assassination in it.
Yes. Where wealthy oil men, lawyers, tech bros, rednecks, and the occasional old Austin hippie all race aging sailboats at lakes and bays across Texas for everlasting glory and, more importantly, bragging rights. While drunk middle-aged men with large boats and larger egos is certainly not the best combination for safety.
Our beautiful boaters.
Our beautiful boaters. The worst that usually happens is the odd collision from time to time. This story actually takes place off the water at a lake in central Texas. Like many lakes in Texas, it was a reservoir created courtesy of the Army Corps of Engineers damming up a river in the early 60s for flood prevention. This particular lake was in a canyon with steep sides and necessitated a very steep and intimidating boat ramp to be carved into the canyon wall to bring boats from the yacht club on a ridge down to the water.
Hmm.
I've been in a boat club like this, but it was on the Occoquan Reservoir, which is not a canyon. It's just a steep valley.
Yeah. We throw your boat down this concrete slide.
Well, I was rowing, so we had to carry the boat
Jesus, fuck
down the
that.
hill. And then worse, when we were finished the race, we had to carry it back up.
You're like those sort of like those mountain goats who like
Yeah.
graze on the side of gravity dams.
Yeah, it's like all right, congrats on doing well in the race. Your prize is you get to walk up about 80 feet of mountain.
Time for leg day.
We just had leg day. Now it's leg day 2.0.
You just use one leg when you're rowing and the other one when you're walking. It's fine.
Oh, there you go. I just sort of hopped the whole way up there.
Yeah.
So this incident occurred on a sunny Saturday morning a few hours before racing was scheduled to begin. While many teams had launched their boats from the trailers prior to the evening, I wish we had a trailer. Several late arrivals still needed to get their boats in the water. The regatta organizers had established a system where one trailer would be backed down the ramp and unloaded into the water, while another trailered boat would wait at the top, ass end down. The ramp was just wide enough to fit two trailers, so when one trailer was unloaded, it would be driven up to the top as the other trailer would back down the ramp.
This is so smart.
Art sounds efficient to me, as long as no one screws up.
It's like a cableway, but with, Fords.
Oh.
Yes. Our team had already splashed our boat, so I had gone up the ramp to help myself to the free breakfast tacos at the clubhouse atop the cliff.
Understandable.
Pretty cool sometimes.
Yeah, that sounds nice. I was walking back down the ramp, beer in one hand and chorizo and egg tacos in the other. That sounds really good right now. When I heard a loud bang followed by someone shouting from the top of the ramp. I turned to look.
I would not turn to look. I've got my taco. I've got my beer.
My beer, my delicious beer, my Shiner Bock.
That is someone else's problem. I'm gonna go sit on a picnic table and I'm gonna eat this.
To my surprise, I saw a boat-laden trailer without any attached vehicle hurtling down the ramp towards me. I dove to the side, narrowly avoided being
this is the thing. I would have been killed, but I would have died happy.
Yes. I dove to the side, narrowly avoided being flattened like a Goomba by roughly 4 tons of steel, wood, and fiberglass. The truck at the bottom of the ramp, still in the process of unloading their own boat, was not so lucky. See attached picture.
Yep.
Donk. Miraculously, the only casualties were a sprained knee sustained by the driver of the truck at the bottom when he jumped out of the way, and my spilled Shiner Bock.
No.
I know. Those are good beers. I like a nice Shiner Bock. Shiner Brewery is a good brewery. This was not a paid endorsement. I just like it. Texas Germans, good people. Apart from the ones who've gone really right wing. Anyway. Oh, and the truck ended up being totaled due to the damage.
Yeah, it looks it.
I feel like a good body shop could fix that. I'm going to be honest.
I don't know. I feel like the hit by boat thing is kind of going to be a detriment.
Yeah.
There might be frame damage.
Could be frame damage. That's true. But maybe not. I don't know.
I think to the A-pillar would probably be the issue.
That might do it, yeah. The cause of the runaway boat trailer was due to an improperly locked trailer coupler that popped off the tow hitch when the trailer backed over the top of the ramp. This can occasionally happen if the coupler isn't checked after attaching the trailer to the hitch, and free-spirited trailers will usually be kept in check by safety chains. Unfortunately, this particular boat owner had simply spot welded his safety chains directly to the trailer frame.
Yeah, for safety.
Yeah.
What's stronger than a weld? I learned this from Gary's mod.
What's stronger?
Not only a weld, but a spot weld.
Well, that's fine if it's stainless steel. No, what's stronger?
It's probably just
what's
steel.
Stronger than a weld is a good weld.
Oh.
Yeah.
He spot welded his safety chains directly to the trailer frame, and the chains tore clean off the trailer when it broke free. The racing had to be delayed for a few hours so a tow truck could come take away the ruined vehicle, but the regatta continued without further incident. The next year, the regatta organizers instituted a safety checklist that every boat owner was required to sign before going down the ramp. So I suppose they learned their lesson. There haven't been any further accidents, but I'm always wary when I walk down that particular ramp.
Yeah, no kidding. It killed your Shiner Bock and also almost you.
I was about to say, yeah, those are two tragedies right there.
That's right.
On a personal note, I wanted to thank you all for providing me with lots of laughs and fun, esoteric knowledge over the past few years. I've been a fan
pleasure.
since before the first episode of Well, There's Your Problem. I got hooked on Franklin when it just came out, and I'm happy to see how far you all have come. Here's to many more hours of disaster-based entertainment. Sincerely, M.
Oh,
That's M from
James
Bond.
reference.
M.
this is
Yes.
M.
Yeah.
Listen, 007, what do you know about Shiner Bock?
We know about sailboats.
Well, sir.
What do you know about trailer hitches?
James Bond doesn't know shit about trailer hitches, I imagine.
Spot welds.
Tell you what,
Observe
great
it.
secret agent, shitty welder.
007, this is a standard trailer hitch.
So if you press here and here,
This welder will only react to your fingerprint.
Now listen, 007, this is a MIG welder.
Oh,
From Lincoln Electric. MI5 is cutting back. Or is it MI6? I forget which one.
Yeah, it's X, yeah.
We had to go to Harbor Freight. Or no, Harbor Freight is Chicago Electric, excuse me.
Same difference. We've been cutting back for a while.
This is true.
And safety third.
That's safety third.
Shake hands with danger.
Our next episode is on the Boston molasses disaster. Does anyone have any commercials before we go?
You know all of our stuff.
Yes.
I do a YouTube channel, and they're cool videos. So yeah, that stuff.
Yeah,
All right.
do that.
Yes, go.
It's just under my name. If you can't find it, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, we can link it in the description,
Yeah. In between the Pete Buttigieg link.
along with many
Yeah.
other things. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, that was a podcast.
Yep. 3 hours, 2 minutes, 48.
It was a train episode, you dirty fucks. You got what
I was
you
about
wanted.
to say, yeah. You paid for this.
Mm.
All right. Well, bye everyone.
See y'all.